I take it completely seriously that we could have full-on AGI in 5 years. Instead of waiting for the predictable evidence to come, just update all the way, bro. You think you've seen scaling? A100s were just the warm-up. Bitch, please. What else do you want? It's not general. It's actually narrow in touch. I'm like, okay, fine, sure, but that's like really missing the point. If you have to solve an actually hard problem in the actual real world, in actual physics, for real, an actual problem, you can't afford to throw your epistemics out the door because you feel bad. If people do this, they come up with shit like, let's blow up TSMC. I mean, things are moving super fast at Conjecture. Like, holy shit, I like whiplash from how fast things are moving here. It feels like I've lived like a whole lifetime in the last like 3 months. Large integers don't exist. Like they're just like, you know, like you can only count this high, bro. Any other numbers? Bullshit. Like that is the truly gigabrain take. Connor, none of this shit fucking matters. You goddamn nerd. No one gives a shit about your. I'm like, okay, you're correct, but
the inside view. The inside view.
The inside view.
Camera, which is, how did you react when you saw this meme, and did you find it like somehow represent your views?
My first reaction to this meme was, hey, I'm in good company. So yeah, I think it's pretty close to what where I would place myself. Not exactly. I don't think anyone could be more AGI bad than Eliezer. I think that is probably possible. And I think, so this is, you know, scale maximalism and AGI soon, I think, are not the same thing. I think I may be more scale maximalist than Yudkowsky, but I'm not sure where we both rank on AGI soonish because I don't really know his timelines that well. So so my original reaction to this was I should probably be where Goran is on this.
Right, because you're both bullish on scale.
Yes, I'm pretty bullish on scale on many things. Happy to talk about exactly what I mean by that. I am not as pessimistic as Eliezer, but I'm pretty close.
So I made another one after the reactions from this one, where I had this quote where you said that you're maybe like more scale-pilled than Eliezer and less doomerish than him. So now you ended up being in this like top right quadrant. Did you have like another reaction from this one, or is it basically the same thing?
My first reaction was, fuck yeah, I got the cool corner. But the second reaction was, Eliezer deserves the corner. Because of course, in every political compass meme, your eyes first go to the most extreme corners.
Right.
Of course, those are where usually insane people are. But like, you're looking at a political compass meme, dude. Like, you want to see the crazy takes. And I feel like as much as I appreciate my positioning here, my takes are marginally milder than Eliezer's.
In terms of pessimism, yes, but in terms of like scale pilled, it doesn't talk about scale so much.
So yeah, we can talk about scaling a bit. So it's not that I literally think that a arbitrarily large, or a large MLP is going to suddenly magically be AGI. That's not exactly what I believe. But I think that almost all of the problems that people on Twitter pontificate about is like unsolved by deep learning will be solved by scale. Like they say like, well, it can't do this kind of reasoning or this kind of reasoning. It can't do this symbolic manipulation, or, it fails at parentheses or whatever. I'm like, just stack more layers, lol. Like, I think there are some things that, may not be solved just by scale, at least not by, normal amounts of scaling. Okay, if you scale the thing to the size of a Jupyter brain or something, maybe a feed-forward MLP is enough. But there's a few other things I think that are necessary, but all of those are like pretty easy. So a few years ago, when I take a piece of paper and I would sketch out how would I build an AGI, there would always be several boxes labeled as magic, where it's like, I don't know how this would actually happen. Those have not all been filled. Like, there's no more boxes where I'm like, I have no idea how to even approach this in principle. There are several of these boxes where I'm like, okay, this seems like difficult, or like current methods don't perform that well on this, but none of them are like fundamentally magic. And scaling is what filled in most of those boxes.
Do you remember what were in those boxes?
If I knew how to build an AGI, I probably wouldn't say it in a public podcast, would I?
Right. Then there was like this, I guess this is like kind of the similar one, but in 3D.
That's the big brain stuff. It's in 4D. This
Four
is the
dimension.
big brain
This
stuff.
is the big brain meme, and this like explains the other one, because the other one is like a projection using something like PCA.
Yeah,
and there's this. I guess like the only one I'm not sure about is like your slightly conscious axis.
I mean, that's just the shitpost axis, right? It's like I'm pretty sure Yosha was shitposting on that thread about what he believes. I don't know. I don't know Yosha that well, but
I believe he's like maybe more a computationalist in terms of consciousness than other people. Like he might believe that just like a program might be conscious, where like
I think Eliezer is very computationalist. I'm very computationalist. I'm more uncertain about that, but it seems to me that computationalism is the default assumption. I'm not saying there's huge problems with computationalism, but I don't see any other that doesn't have equally, if not larger, problems.
Do you believe that a large language model could be conscious?
Depending on what you mean the word we're conscious. Conscious is what Marvin Minsky called the suitcase word. You can have two people both use the word conscious and mean something that has absolutely nothing to do with each other. So like some people, when they say conscious, they mean like has attention or, has memory or something like that. While other people have some like ideas about self-reflectivity or have ideas about emotions or like whatever. So consciousness is an unresolved pointer. You have to dereference the pointer before you can actually talk about the question. There are certain definitions of the word consciousness that language models obviously have. Like they can reason semantically. Like if your definition of consciousness is can write a decent fiction story, then yes, they're conscious. But like, is that the best definition? Probably not. That's not what we usually mean by that. But then, so like the theory of consciousness that I take most seriously are like the simple, just like illusionist / attention schema, like Grassroots or whatever his name is, type theories, where we describe consciousness as just kind of like just like an emergent, just like what it feels like to be a planning algorithm from the inside. That's my default assumption. It's just like there's no mystery here. Like this is just what it feels like to be a planning algorithm. There's no mystery. There's no hard problem. That's just how it is. And whether these systems have experience is just like not really a question. It's like, it's just, there's no mystery here. It's just, there's just the physics. There's nothing more.
I think for me, like the main difference with, how human experience consciousness would be that for us is more like a physical continuum where you cannot really like interrupt our computation, except from like maybe going to sleep would count as like stopping our consciousness for a bit.
I sometimes lose consciousness when I'm listening to music or I'm driving a car or something like that. Sometimes things just be like, oh, I'm home. How did this happen? So like, I think talking about consciousness is a great example of an excellent way to waste all of your time and energy and make absolutely zero progress on any problem that matters. Like if anyone brings in consciousness to conversation, I'm like, okay, so we're not making progress today.
Right. So we're not making progress on AI, but at some point we're going to get like AGI or like very smart models, and we're going to take moral decisions as to like whether we can turn them off or. So
now we have to talk about is and ought. So the problem with the word consciousness is that on the one hand, it's an is. You say, some people will generally say consciousness is a property that certain systems have or don't have. But then also there's an ought, that consciousness is the property that gives them moral weight. So I think there's perfectly good arguments to be made that, for example, animals or young children don't have consciousness in the same way as adults do. I'm not saying I agree or disagree with this. I'm just saying there are perfectly coherent arguments to be made. And now you could argue, does that mean that they don't have rights? Does it mean I can torture them? I mean, I don't know. I'm saying probably not. So
they have less voting rights.
Yes, they do. And you can argue, is consciousness the relevant factor there or not? I don't know. You can define it that way. I think it's a much better way to kind of try to separate the is from the ought. It's like, okay, let's separate the computational complexity or like the computational properties or whatever properties the consciousness has. For example, QRI, my favorite mad scientists, think a lot about what they call valence structuralism and like quality of formalism. So they think that like there is an objective fact about consciousness and valence and emotions, qualia and stuff like this. Are they correct? Fuck if I know. But at least it's like something you can talk about, or you can like at least try to reason about. And then you have to make the additional moral argument. So for example, I can say I identify some structure that I think is related to valence. So valence is how good something feels. Right. And let's say I identify, so for example, Curie has a theory, which is like the valence, like the symmetry theory of valence. So they think like the symmetry of like neural processes is like what valence is. That's just one of the theories they have. So let's say this is true. Let's say it's true. What does true mean? Let's say I study this thing. I show in every brain study, I study all the brains. I look at everything. And yeah, whenever there's like symmetry, high valence is reported, whatever, right? Cool. Now I have a theory. And now I could claim, all right, now I have to additionally make the claim, this is something that's morally valuable. We should, for example, maximize valence, for example, and then this valence cashes out physically as symmetry. This then has some really weird consequences. Since, for example, black holes are very symmetrical. So maybe being a black hole is the most awesome thing in the world, and we should just collapse the universe into a black hole. So, which is, I'm not saying that this is a position anyone endorses. I'm just saying it's really hard, and we're extraordinarily confused about this. I don't think anyone, any philosopher, any cognitive scientist, anyone anywhere has any remotely close to a satisfying answer to these kinds of questions. It's not clear to me if there are satisfying answers. I think it's something people should think more seriously about. It's something that I think should be investigated in whatever means necessary. But I do not think this is something that is in the same kind of epistemological category as the kind of work we do in AI. So I'm not saying these are not important questions. I expect these questions to become extraordinarily pressing in the near future, but they're kind of like a different epistemic category. They require different kinds of epistemic inquiry than you might do when you're like, Admiral Layerswell. So we could talk about the philosophy and valence and stuff like this for hours or whatever, probably get absolutely nowhere except, I don't know, high. But,
We're in California. We need to get
It's true. We are in California, so this is the time.
So yeah, let's stop this continuous debate here. I just wanted to get like your thoughts on the is and out, but now we talked about it. Now the last meme for us will be like the one from Rob Bensinger, which is more close to people's views. And there's a bit more people here, and the axes are a bit different. Is AGI not soon and AGI soon? And then all future values unlikely to be destroyed by misaligned AI, which is maybe more what we care about. I don't know if he asked you before your position, mm-hmm. but I guess we're both in the below right corner. Mm-hmm. And there's now a scale with like the years. And he didn't ask me for the years. I think the years are a bit off for me. But yeah, what do you think of this? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think this is pretty accurate. I think this is pretty accurate to my kind of beliefs. I'm not sure what dates did he put in? Oh yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, those look about right for me, for my timelines.
I think it's 2030 for you.
Yeah, that seems about right for my kind of thinking. And yeah, I expect, so I think the main disagreement between me and Eliezer is not so much a disagreement, or more than just I am much more uncertain than him. I do not know how a human can get to the level of epistemic confidence that he seems to have. So I don't disagree with Eliezer, really. I disagree on some things. I don't disagree with most of his arguments about why alignment is hard. It's more just I'm less certain than him of this. Like, I'm just like, I have a greater variance that I could just be wrong about something. So that's why I, by default, am less pessimistic than him. Right. But if I was as confident as him, I would probably be close to as pessimistic as him. Not exactly, but close.
Right. So you're saying that basically you could be at 99% probability of doom, but have like 5 or 10% error bars.
Yes, that's kind of my thinking.
Right. And in terms of timelines, I remember you talking on Discord or in the last episode that, yeah, you had pretty short timelines. And so like, even like when we got like some breakthroughs in deep learning, you still had those like short timelines. So you didn't like update much from those. So I'm really curious because like in the past 2 weeks, we had Minerva that could do like math and multitask understanding. So it got 50% accuracy on math, which Jacob Stannard predicted would happen by 2025. Did that update your timelines by anything?
Not really. I mean, maybe very mildly, just because every small bit of information should update you some amount.
Right.
But so basically, so yeah, we've had these big, released in the last 2 weeks, and over the last like 2 months, the Metaculus prediction for when AGI come has dropped by like 6 months each, like twice within 1 month. So when you look at something like this, you can do what the rationalists, I believe, refer to as a pro-gamer move. And if you see a probability distribution only ever updates in one direction, just do the whole update. Instead of waiting for the predictable evidence to come, just update all the way, bro. Just do the whole thing. And this is basically what happened back to me back in like 2020. So I updated hard on GPT-3. So I was already updating on GPT-2. Like I had my biggest update, I think, on timelines was the release of GPT-2 100 million parameters. That was the really, really terrible model that could like barely string together a coherent sentence. And I remember seeing that for the first time, and I was just like, holy shit, this is amazing. This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen in my life. And like a lot of other people didn't update as strongly as I did on that, but like I was already like, holy shit, this is like, we're actually going to see AGI dudes. Like, this is actually crazy. I didn't update all the way to like super short timelines. I was still like, I don't know, 2045 at that time or something. But then when GPT-3 came out, and especially because it didn't need new techniques, they just scaled the model larger, and it makes such a huge difference. That's when I started to really update. And so that's, when I was like started EleutherAI, I was like, holy shit, like I'm updating hard on this. I'm pivoting. We need to work on this. Like after GPT-2, I was kind of like, this is probably the end of the road. I'm going to work on something different for a while. Now I'm kind of burnt out on this like language model stuff. Then GPT-3 came out, like, nope, back. I'm coming back. I'm back, boys. So I updated very hard. I pivoted back to this, and I'm like, okay, look, especially it's like, it's hard sometimes, hindsight bias to see how things were, but like 2 years ago, things were quite different, especially in the alignment community. Right. Like people weren't really taking scaling and language models nearly as seriously as me and my friends were back in 2020. And so with EleutherAI, we were like one of the first groups that kind of like took these like super, super serious. We're not the only ones. Like there were like lots of groups like OpenAI and like the later Anthropic people and stuff like that were already thinking in this regard. They were ahead of us. But like we were some of the early people in like the wider alignment community to update like really hard on this and really shift our behavior in response to this. So basically over like the first like year or two of EleutherAI, we basically built so much tacit knowledge about these models. We read every blog post. We played with models every day. We tried to build our own. We trained them. We see how they work. We thought seriously about them. We wrote blog posts. We thought about it. The limits and stuff. That we basically had a speed run of updates that took other people like 2 or 3 years to do. And so I updated. So I've already, the update that Minerva gave other people, I already had in like late 2020, basically. So, and since then I haven't had to update very much. It's like Gato, not surprising. Like not at all surprising. Like that surprised me took that long. Like the chain of thought prompts were like not at all surprising. That's like something I knew about like 6 to 12 months before anyone else in the world knew about it. That's one of the things I'm actually quite proud of, that EleutherAI, we found out that those worked.
Did you find the let's think by step by step?
Yes, like that kind of stuff. It wasn't exactly that prompt, but this type of technique we actually discovered before anyone else did. And we kept it secret because we were like, holy shit, this is like really scary. And so that's like one of the things we then didn't publish until after other people started publishing about it. And then we published our draft about it, which we've been sitting on for like 6 months. So a lot of the things that people are discovering now, we discovered at EleutherAI within like the first 12 months. So I have been running that update ever since. And so there hasn't been much stuff that's been updating me. Like the only updates I've been having are like on like hardware progress. Like it seems like the H100s are like quite a bit better than I expected them to be, which is a bit spooky.
Do you know what makes them much better?
Just the performance numbers. I haven't used them myself, but that I've heard as such seem like really quite impressive. And I have heard rumors about like how much money corporations starting to spend on these things. And I'm like, oh shit. Like you think you've seen scaling? That was just the A100s were just the warm up.
We're going to see billions of dollars spent on H100s.
I expect that, yeah.
Okay, so what you've just said about scaling resonates with me about like a meme I did recently about the Chad scale maximalist who like didn't perform any like Bayesian updates since 2020 because like he read this like neural scaling paper, log plots, and then like, okay, I got it.
Yep, that is that's sort of what happened. I mean, there was more tacit knowledge, there was more experimentation than that, but yeah, basically, if you look hard enough at the log plots and you just kind of, and you look at like, hardware scaling, and you have a bit of experience with how these models perform yourself, you do some experiments, you see how prompt improves performance and stuff. As Eliezer likes to say sometimes, the empty string should convince you, but here's some additional bits.
Thanks for the additional bits. Most people like look at models through Twitter. They look at cool outputs, and yeah, I guess the most impressive models so far have been DALL-E, Imagen, and Party. So like they can show their understanding by just like throwing like cool pictures. Like, were you impressed by those at all?
DALL-E 2 was a mile. I mean, it wasn't really an update because I don't think it's that important for timelines. So EleutherAI was also very early on art models. So we were like some of the first people to be, dicking around with like, clip guided diffusion and stuff like that. So I basically already had an update back then as well. We had like a pretty early update where like I looked at how small these models were and how good they already performed. And they're like, okay, just log plot, bro, Lamau. But yeah, so I already had a pretty early update on the art models. I knew this was coming. DALL-E was better than I expected in the coherence sense. Like I can't stress this enough for people who haven't tried DALL-E. It is actually amazing. Like DALL-E is one of the clear, like for me, GPT-3 was the obvious, like, okay, how can you look at this and not be like, oh shit, we're on takeoff is around the corner. This is like, but DALL-E is like so understandable. Like GPT-3, I understand if people can like confused by it, or like GPT-3 is kind of confusing. It's kind of like hard to understand what it's actually doing and how it fails and such. But like DALL-E, you can just like we have a bunch of DALL-E art hanging around the office actually, and it's just incredible. Like it's coherent. It can compose objects. It can do scenes. Like, yeah, sure. Sometimes it'll fail at like some reasoning task. You say, draw 3 red blocks and it'll draw 4. Like, okay, sure, it's not perfect. But you ever a good heuristic I like to use to think about when we should be like maybe taking something seriously or not is, imagine you were the protagonist in a sci-fi movie, a sci-fi horror movie. When would the audience be screaming at you? And I'm pretty sure like GPT-2, 3, DALL-E, and like imagine this is a horror movie, right? Yeah. And you have like the scientists in the lab, and they click a button, and draw this theme first, and draws, and like draw yourself, and it's like a robot like looking at them, and they're like, oh yeah, this isn't interesting. You would be yelling at the screen at this point in time. There's like, sure, you can always post hoc, or he's like, oh, it's just a neural network. Oh, it's just combining previous concepts. Like, bitch, please. Come on. Like, okay, what else do you want? Like, what do you want? There's a great meme I remember somewhere where it was like, the year is 2040, Terminators are destroying the world, whatever. And it's like Gary Mark is in the ruins of MIT, but they're not using symbolic methods.
They're only using deep learning.
Yeah, so it's not true intelligence, he says before, he dissolves into nanobots.
So we're basically in the movie Don't Look Up, where there's like an asteroid coming, and every time like we react to something like, oh, he's not very smart, like, oh, you can't go do like a red cube on top of a blue cube. Mm-hmm. We're basically like the journalists in the movie Don't Look Up, where like there's this asteroid coming, and be like, oh yeah, it's just an asteroid, we can just like deflect it. Not a very problem. And like the audience is just watching the movie and be like, what the fuck, guys? Like, do something about the asteroid. Like, do something. We're just like screaming at the movie.
Yep, that's. I haven't seen that movie, but yes, that's kind of. Sometimes I feel this way. Like, I think there are reasonable things to be skeptical about and such or whatever, but also like, do the calculus, people. Like, you're to all the ML professors out there who don't take these kind of risks very seriously. Like, you're smart people. You understand probability. Like, consider the possibility here that, there are multiple options here, and the options of the not good outcomes are not trivial. I like Stuart Russell, I think, said this. Like, it seems a very shocking amount of like AI professionals never ask themselves the question, what if we succeed? Like, what if just everything works exactly as planned? You want to write an AGI that can do anything a human does, and you just do exactly that. What then? So some people, I think, will answer something like, well, the AI will just love us, or it will just do what we want it to do. And I'm like, oh, God, that's... We can talk about that later if you want to get into some of the technical details about alignment and why I expect this problem to be hard. As he said in the scale on the graph, I'm pre-scale maximalist. I expect AGI to not be too hard and to come soon, and I expect alignment to be hard.
Yeah, we'll talk about AI alignment later. But I guess the thing about like what if we succeed, some people definitions of succeeding is like making the stuff do what we want them to do, right? So for them, like alignment is part of the problem.
That's fair enough. That's a fair kind of point, and I do think some people do think about it that way. I don't think many people think of it very explicitly. I think a lot of people kind of just like focus on making number go brr, just like improve benchmark performance, just make it smarter and such. And like there's a common meme where kind of like, well, an intelligent system will just know what we want. And I think there's very strong reasons to believe that is not trivially true. Like there are versions of this that might be true, but the default version I do not expect to be true.
Yeah, I think some people take like alignment by default to be like pretty likely, and I think for both of us it's pretty unlikely. Just to finish on the scaling part, did EleutherAI like discover chinchilla or something similar, or was this a new law that you discovered?
We did not discover the
Right.
chinchilla law. I'm aware of multiple groups that did. So DeepMind weren't the only ones who discovered this. Multiple other groups did as well, but we were not one of them.
Gotcha. And on the graph, on the memes that I mentioned, we talked a lot about AGI, and I think to ground the discussion a little bit more, we should like just maybe define it, or just like use a definition we both find useful to talk about it.
Yeah. So this is...
Or we can ban this word as well.
Yeah. So no, I think this is good. I think AGI is actually a good word. So my favorite definition, I think, is from a post from Stephen Burns, which I think may not be posted yet. It may be posted by the time this episode goes out, where he kind of like pushes back against Jan LeCun, who argues that like general AI doesn't exist. So the way I think about the word AGI is there are definitions which are wrong in technicalities but true in spirit, and there are those that are technically maybe accurate but wrong in spirit. So I like the ones who are true in spirit, but every time I bring those up, some nitpicker will be like, well, actually, technically what you just said is incoherent. And I'm like, okay, sure, I'm aware of this. Finding a real technical definition is extremely hard and almost always missing. So for the purpose of this discussion, I think it's more productive if we use a definition which is, not 100% technically rigorous, but, brings across more of the spiritual correctness.
The vibe.
The vibe. That's what the Zoomers say, I guess.
We're in California. We need to talk
We're
about
in
the vibe.
California. True. I have to adapt to the culture more.
Right.
But yeah. So like I think a definition, the obvious definition a lot of people use, something, a system that can do anything a human can do as good or better. I think that's like a pretty reasonable, and not just like one individual human, a system that can do any task any human can do as good or better than the best human could, or a median human could, depending on which definition you want to use.
It should be able to use a computer and like go on the internet, but not like code AIs.
Not necessarily. So I don't like this definition for a few reasons. So I'm sorry, I'm giving such an annoying answer, but like I think this is actually kind of important to talk about. I'm going to give you basically 4 definitions or something, which are all wrong, but they're all right in different directions. And if you kind of like take the intersection or like the union, you get something which kind of makes sense. So this first one is like pretty good because it points out that we care about a thing that does things. So I don't, for example, think it makes sense to define AGI by its architecture or by its internal calculations or how big it is or something like that. I don't think that's really what we care about. So like some people try to define AGI like, it can't be true intelligence if it doesn't use method X. I don't think that's a good definition, because what we care about is, does it do the thing or not? And then we can argue about what the thing is. So the reason this is not a good definition is because I don't think it captures what I'm most concerned about. So for example, I very much think there could be AGIs that can hack any computer on the planet, that can develop, nanotechnology, that can, fly to Jupiter or whatever, but can't catch a ball, because they just don't put their computation into that.
Right.
And then someone could say, aha, it's not general, it's actually narrow in touch. And I'm like, okay, fine, sure, but that's like really missing the point.
Thanks, Gary Marcus.
Yes. So like a different definition that also is not correct, but I get to another good I like, which is one that I think Eliezer has pointed out in the past, is a thing that has the thing that humans do and chimps don't. So chimps don't go to the moon. They don't go like a tenth as far to the moon and then crash or something. They don't go to the moon. They don't build industrial society. They don't generalize to all these domains. They don't develop biotechnology and computers and whatever. There is something that humans have that no other animal on the planet has. A lot of animals have like various bits and pieces of it. Like it's clear that, like chimpanzees use tools and they can like have like a very primitive kind of like sort of proto language, like not really a language. But they have like different grunts that like mean different things and stuff, and they can reason socially about each other. Like I actually really recommend any AI research out there, like read a book about chimpanzee behavior. Like it's incredible how many people will make statements about like how not just AI research, it's also like a lot of philosophers of mind will like make statements about like how animals clearly aren't intelligent because they can't do X, Y, Z, and then you just like read a book from an actual biologist that has worked with these animals. You're like, clearly these animals do X, Y, and Z. Like chimpanzees obviously have theory of mind of each other. Like they can obviously reason about not just what is the other chimp currently doing, but what does the other chimp know about what I am doing? Like this has been shown in experiments. Like it's like very clear that chimps can do stuff like this. But chimps don't go to Mars or the moon. Why not? So there's some general kind of capacity, which may be relatively simple. So there might be a relatively simple algorithmic core to the kind of general reasoning that humans do, which again, some, like Jan LeCun or Schmidhuber might be, bursting through my door right now. It's like, well, actually, it's not truly general because no free lunch or whatever, right? And like, okay, sure, fine. Humans suck at theorem proving or whatever, right? But we can build computers, so does it really matter? So a definition I really like, which is this definition that Steve uses in this post, which may or may not be released, is he points out that like some people say, well, like Jan LeCun, I think, would say this. By the way, I am very sorry to anyone I am misrepresenting here. Sorry, Jan. Sorry, Jürgen. I'm sorry if I'm misrepresenting any of you guys. It's not my intention. But my understanding is they will say something. Well, there'll never be an agent that is, can, do biotech and code AIs and catch a ball and do blah, blah, blah. Like that's like computationally impossible. Like it would be such I think that is true. Like in the limit, of course, you can always find like, oh, well, it can't solve NP hard problems, can it? I'm like, yeah, okay, sure, fine. But what makes humans the best at solving protein folding is not because our brain has evolved to do protein folding calculations. It's because we invented AlphaFold. And I think that is at the core of what general and what AGI should mean. So AGI may or may not be good at protein folding, but it is capable of inventing AlphaFold. It is incapable of inventing these kind of tools. It might not be good at doing orbital mechanics, but it can write a physics simulator and build a rocket. So I think that's a good definition we should use, which is not very strict, but
I think the main difference between like humans and like one AI agent, which is that like genuinely we are like a bunch of humans on Earth. We die, some others come around and just like invent new things, and we like read books. So we're not like one agent. It's more like a billion agents doing stuff. And so like when we create AlphaFold, it's like a team of people doing AlphaFold and like all the other science we did before. It's like if we program an AI, we train it on some data, and then we test it. It might like invent protein folding, but not like another thing. So it will need like other iterations, or at least like be able to like interact in the environment, not just something that it's static and just like is trained and then like tested. So it needs to. So I guess like that's the main steel man I get from like those guys. It's just like they think it's impossible to do something very general that can learn any kind of problem.
Yeah, and I think basically there's a failure of imagination here. Is that they are pattern matching to how current AI systems look. They say like AlphaFold, which is trained on one data set and it does one task. But there is at least one existence proof of a system which is trained on just like a bunch of garbage, just with the real world, and learns how to do all these things, which is humans. And you can say, well, sure, there's multiple humans, whatever. But like, yeah, that's just run multiple copies, Lamau, or just build a bigger brain. Like the fact that it takes 10 humans to develop AlphaFold or something is just an implementation glitch in humans. If we could just build a 10 times larger, single human, or we just have, a Giga von Neumann, he would just invent it himself. He wouldn't need the team. He wouldn't need the other people. It might take him some amount of time. But like, if anything, the fact that humans are separate entities and not just one giga brain is just like an implementation flaw in the intelligence sense. Like it's pretty clear to me that if you could just somehow pool all the compute, that would be better. Like kind of strictly so.
Right, and AI could just copy itself. And so the first definition is something like what any median human could do. The second definition is what is different between like a chimpanzee and a human, basically like the different level of generality between a chimpanzee and a human. Yeah. What are the third and fourth, if you still remember?
So the third was basically this like Steve's definition, which is like a thing that can invent tools, which is kind of overlapping with the second one.
Okay.
I don't remember what my fourth example was. I think it was the like it can do all economically relevant tasks or something, but I was actually going to bring that as an example of a bad definition. But I think we're going to talk about that later.
Yeah. So just like taking those definitions, just like maybe the convex envelope of those 3 or 4 definitions. When do you think we will get AGI? That's a very controversial question. You can just like give me like very large intervals.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the answer is I don't know.
Right.
I have various intuitions, I have various inside views and various outside views on this and so on. And like, you know, these numbers might shift depending on, you know, what time of day you ask me or whatever. But generally, kind of the meme answer I give people is like, you know, like 20 to 30% in the next 5 years, 50% by 2030, 99% by 2100, 1% had already happened.
It already happened like in some lab already?
Yeah, we just haven't realized it yet.
I can buy it.
I mean, that's obviously a meme answer. I don't read too much into that.
I could buy a world where we've already invented AGI and it's just like hidden, like
yeah, we don't realize it. We're just like staring at it and we're like, this thing seems weird, but like we haven't realized what.
Oh, you mean like we're in a simulation?
No. It's just like, I mean, that's also an option, but let's not get into that bullshit. No, just like, you know, someone invented GPT-4 or something and they're like, I mean, it seems cute. While in the background, it's like doing something crazy and just like, no, it's like hiding itself or like we can't know it.
Treacherous turn.
Yeah, like a treacherous turn has like already happened and it's already in motion and we just are not going to realize it until like something crazy happens. Like, don't read too much into that. Like, it's mostly a meme that I say that just to like raise the hypothesis to people's attention. Like my error bars on these are all like relatively large, but like, I take it, what is very important is I take it completely seriously that we could have full-on AGI in 5 years. I think that is an absolutely realistic possibility that we should all take completely seriously.
I agree that people don't talk about it enough. And I think for me, I guess the main crux or the most important factor here is, will this AGI thing be able to like self-improve and, you know, become an even smarter version of itself very fast? So for me, I think the one concept that is more important is like recursively self-improving AI. Could be like a very smart version of Copilot that creates Copilot 2 or yeah. Do you have like any definition for this, or even because I guess like technically an AI could code another AI and we don't have like a very strong metric of like what it means to like improve itself. So is this like something you think about or you consider when you think about like those 5 years?
So I don't think splitting on the axis of recursively self-improving versus not is a natural way to split things. I definitely agree if we have a system that is like clearly recursively self-improving, we're probably fucked. But I think it is sufficient but not necessary, basically. I think also it's like not clearly defined. Like I think there's lots of intermediate steps where, for example, you have a system which may not be technically modifying its code, but maybe it can like gradient hack, like it can change its training data or can train its like internal gradients, or maybe it can like, you know, copy itself to more GPUs or something like that. So like a pretty obvious example I could imagine happening is something like, okay, we have some system, it runs on like, I don't know, 10 A100s and is like as smart as John von Neumann or whatever, right? Or 100, whatever, it doesn't matter. And then, you know, or like let's give this an example. We have an algorithm that if run on 100 A100s is as smart as John von Neumann, but we're running it on 10 because like some grad student, right? And he looks in like, shit, this seems kind of stupid. Well, I'm about to head in for the night. I'll just like run it on the big cluster and I'll check in tomorrow. And then, you know, it runs on like 1,000 A100s. And then, you know, it suddenly becomes, you know, Giga von Neumann. And then before you even realize, you know, who knows what kind of things will learn or how it would act or whatever. Like it's, I think a very important part of my model of thinking about AGI is that there's nothing inherently special about the point and intelligence axes of human. It's like, you know, we have like axes where like of intelligence, and at some point we have like median human, at some point we have like John von Neumann or whatever, and there's no reason that as we increasingly go from, like slug to like bug to, rat or whatever, that as this continues, we naturally halt at the human thing. Like I think the difference between a median human and John von Neumann in the scheme of things is like smaller than the difference between like, like a reptile and a rat, and on like whatever the scale means. So it's very likely that if we have like something that's, smart as a chimp or something, or like as smart as a rat, and we're like, this looks lame as hell, and then we run on a big computer, it won't like stop at John von Neumann. It will just shoot right past that into like some crazy regime that we don't know what that would even look like or do. This is guaranteed to happen? Of course not. Look at it. No, predictions are hard to make, especially about the future. Like, maybe this won't happen. I don't know, man. But this seems like the null hypothesis. Like, we don't have any reason to not think this would happen. So we should just entertain the hypothesis that this is the default thing that will happen, because we just don't have a good theory of how, intelligence scales. We have those scaling laws, but those don't really tell you that much. They tell you loss. But if I give you a loss number, my model is 2.01. How good is it at math? Like, the information isn't contained in that number. Or like, will it do a treacherous turn? It has loss 1.4. And you're like, this doesn't mean anything. And it's like the kind of the things we've observed where even so the scaling of the losses are very smooth, the scaling on benchmarks can often be pretty discontinuous. It's just like it has 0.0000090%.
Right, the performance on downstreaming tasks are discontinuous. And I think, so you're basically saying that copying yourself to another server could be like a convergence instrumental goal for an AI, and that might happen before you're like able to like. It
doesn't even have to be the AI doing it. It could just be the researcher, testing some new architecture or something, and in his test on his like local machine, it like doesn't really perform that well, or it seems like totally harmless, and then they scale it up to the whole OpenAI cluster or whatever, and then suddenly it just does something crazy. What I'm saying is like. I'm not saying this is going to happen definitely or something. What I'm saying is we can't rule this out. This is like one of the main things I would like to stress. I'm not saying I know this is how the world is going to end. This is how AGI is going to happen. This is when it's going to happen. What I'm saying is, hey, here's a bunch of scenarios that we can't rule out. I'm not saying they will happen, but we can't rule them out. And like I feel like a lot of critics of these kind of positions seem to be unnecessarily confident. They might say, I don't expect that to happen in most, it's not my high probability. And that's fine. If you say, I have like a 10% probability or 1% probability these things happen, that's okay. I can argue about that. But 0%? You have to be really goddamn confident for that to be the case. You have to have some really strong theoretical reasons to disbelieve. The same way I take seriously that it might be that all these things just aren't a problem. It's just like, either deep learning stops scaling, or, we hit some other roadblock, or like alignment just turns out too easy. I think I assign, some probability that those are true. That might be the case. I can't rule them out. I can't rule out that it turns out alignment's just easy, or that scaling breaks. I can't rule these scenarios out. I don't expect them, but I don't rule them out. And I kind of think that the critics of like AI safety and such should do the same, is they should just like kind of say like, okay, I can't rule out that these scenarios would happen, even if I think they're unlikely.
So if they were less confident about it, they would give it like maybe like 10%, and they would start working on AI alignment.
Well, I think if you give 10% chance that, potentially the whole world could, be destroyed in the next 5 to 10 years by this thing, that seems like a reasonable thing that, okay, even if you don't want to work on that, I think we could maybe agree that like, it's like the whole field of AI alignment is like 200 people maybe. Mm-hmm. And like, it feels like a few more people could be working on this problem. Like just as an outside view, like say you're an alien observing a primitive species on another planet, and like, okay, they've identified the problem. They have 200 people working on it. Again, would the audience be screaming at the screen right now?
Yes.
It feels like, I don't think it's that crazy of a proposition that maybe a few more researchers should take this seriously, or at least not shit talk it on Twitter. I think this is a pretty reasonable thing. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Right. And I think when we talk about, taking it seriously, we have, even among those 200 researchers, pretty different views. So some people are more closer to the effective altruism movement, might be more optimistic than you, or even people like working at, let's say, Anthropic, OpenAI, can be as bullish as us on scale, but still believe that we have 90% chance of getting it right. That we're doing a good job with alignment research, and even like 200 people is good enough. So one report that came in 2020 was AGI Quatra's reports trying to estimate what she calls transformative AI. So we can talk about the definition of transformative AI, but basically it's something that will happen before AGI that is pretty significant for our economies. And I guess like that put some like anchor into people's timelines. And they thought like, oh, okay, that might happen in AGI Quatra's report. So she gives those numbers maybe like 2040, 2050. And she did a good job of like trying to estimate the things. So I'll give it like 5 years less or 10 years less. But like having a big jump from her report is basically like being overconfident. So yeah, I guess like a bunch of people in EA are anchoring themselves around those estimates. Maybe they like updated with like recent progress. But they don't think that there's like 20 to 40% chance of getting AGI in 5 years. So I think they're like maybe less pessimistic and less bullish.
I think we should separate when people's timelines from how hard they think AGI is. Like the AGI report is fundamentally about when we should expect, TAI, which is a certain definition of AGI, which I used to really like, but I now actually kind of dislike. We can talk about why. It's not really about how hard alignment is or like how high the probability of doom is. So I think you definitely put that correctly, that a lot of people in the EA sphere are way more optimistic about how hard alignment is going to be. I think part of that is because of longer timelines. If I thought I had 20 years of time to work on this or 100 years to work on this, I would be way more optimistic. But so there is a correlation here between these two factors, but I do think they're separate. There's also people who have very short timelines but are still very optimistic, and they tend to work at OpenAI.
Right, so they're correlated. But I would like to make a distinction between like two kind of people who are either like very bullish on AI, short timelines but optimistic, and people who have like longer timelines and maybe like a bit more optimistic because they have more time. Mm-hmm. And those people are like not as concerned as you probably. Yeah. And I guess like not working maybe as hard, or just like not trying high risk startups. So yeah. Do you have like any other thoughts on this report, or like some stuff because you said you agreed with it at the beginning, and now maybe you have like some disagreements? Yeah,
so I have some thoughts in that report. So first of all, I want to just point out that I think it's great that it was done.
Agreed.
Like I am so happy that someone just actually sat down and just did the work. Like that report is like, Jesus Christ, that must have been a lot of work to put that thing together. Like the amount of effort put into like really exhaustively looking into every point, really writing down every assumption, every calculation, justifying things. Like truly, this is the kind of stuff I love about EA and like rationalism. It's just like this kind of just like taking an idea, whether or not it's crazy, and just like really running with it, just really going through the whole thing. So big props to Ajaya and everyone else who was involved in that report. I'm really glad it was done. I do disagree with the conclusions though. And so at first, first I have a few problems with the definition of TAI as the kind of thing we should be concerned about.
Can we like just define transformative AI if you remember the definition?
Yeah, so I think the definition of transformative AI was something like a system that can perform any like economically valuable task a human in front of a computer could do, or like a remote worker could do, or something. And I think it has like some definition about like a certain percentage of the economical work, like 50% of economical work could be performed by this AI or something like that. I don't remember the exact definition, unfortunately.
I think it's more about its consequences on like how much it could influence the GDP growth rate.
Yeah,
the world total world GDP growth rate.
Yeah, like that's similar to like Paul's definition of slow takeoff, where he talks about and also like Hansen's to a degree. So it's good that you bring that up, because one very strong opinion I have is GDP is absolutely one of the worst possible measures for AGI progress, and there's like very, very good reasons we should never use it. John Wentworth, I believe, wrote a very good post about this, or maybe it was Dina Kokotajlo. It was one of the other, against GDP as a measure for AI progress. And basically, so there's multiple problems. The obvious problem, the first problem is, of course, that GDP is like slow. It would only measure things that are like go over years or decades, like slowly integrate themselves into the economy and such. But even more importantly, GDP doesn't really measure what most people think it measures. If you actually look how GDP is calculated, it's in a way kind of set up rather perversely in that it kind of is designed to measure the things that don't grow. The way it's set up is that it's like you can look at like, current world GDP is like definitely higher than it was several years or a decade or so ago. But for example, Wikipedia has zero impact on world GDP. I think Wikipedia is one of the most valuable artifacts ever created by mankind. Like literally one of the most valuable things ever made. And it has literally $0 impact on world GDP because it's not a product and there's no exchange of services or anything like that. This applies to software, to open source, to knowledge, the internet. Like there's this like phantom GDP that people think should exist. Like there's all this value created by like technologies, by like internet, by like open source and all this kind of stuff, which is just not in GDP. So like you can have people with like, or like countries with GDP today that are like middle income or like low income countries that have access to the whole internet, but are by GDP measures no better off than in the 1970s. And so clearly, if we were thinking about a powerful, rapidly emerging digital technology that will like change how things work, that will like scale incredibly efficiently, this is a pretty clear, and GDP can't even capture the difference between, living in India in 1970 versus living, in some other, it's a middle income country today with access to the whole internet. Clearly, this is the wrong measure to be using. So that's like the one that's like I think the main point of that post. It's explained better in the post than I explained here, but I find that quite convincing. There's also a separate point which Eliezer brings up, I think, at a few places, which I find somewhat compelling.
Is this the post about like why is it wrong to reason about biological anchors?
Yes, I think he brings it up in that one. I don't exactly remember. There's a lot of Eliezer posts. And the point he makes is basically that because of like regulatory slowness, because of the slowness of economy to uptake new technologies and stuff, what we will probably see is that the first AGI or like powerful AI system that we actually see is the first one who's overcome a threshold to be able to circumvent these systems. So, this is one of the ways I think very fast takeoff could happen, in that there is actually so this is one of the things where both Paul and Eliezer can be right in this scenario. In this scenario, we have a gradual takeoff. So we have systems that gradually become stronger across, but because of like government regulation, because of corporate like skittishness, because of like conservatism, nothing's ever released because they're like, oh no, it's like we have to like first review this for 5 years or 10 years or whatever, and then so the public doesn't see any of this. So there's like this like thing ticking along in the background that the public doesn't see, and then at one moment we have the breakout, or like some powerful system that escapes onto the internet, or like that can like manipulate politicians or whatever to like make itself able to spread or whatever, and then it will look like this happened overnight, even so it didn't actually happen overnight. This is like already the case. In like it's we surround ourselves with AI people. We talk about AI and AGI all the time, but like if you talk to your Uber driver, like it's like what's AI? I've never heard that word before. It's like for most of the world outside of like our tech bubble, like they don't know what the fuck a DALL-E is. They don't know what a GPT is. They don't know what any of these things mean. So I think from the perspective of like many average people, even if there is a slow takeoff, it may very well resemble a very fast takeoff. And I find this argument moderately convincing. Like I think that's seems like a reasonable scenario that could occur. I'm not saying it will, but it's like, again, seems like a pretty reasonable scenario. So for these kind of reasons, I think the definition of TAI is kind of like, it has the benefit of being coherent. Like this is a thing I can talk and reason about, but it has the problem that I don't think this is the actual thing we should be worried or care about. And then like, I expect by the time TAI is technically created, it may already be like way too late.
Yeah, I think there's like a couple of distinctions that you made that are interesting. One is, like not everything is in GDP. Wikipedia is not in GDP. Maybe like indirectly because like we used Wikipedia to train some models.
Yeah, very indirectly. Wikipedia obviously produces like unimaginable amounts of value. on the whole world. If you could like measure how much it like improves people's education and like ability to think and like so on, I would not be surprised if we could measure this if it was trillions of dollars. Like I would not be surprised.
Right. It's just like if we have a world without Wikipedia and a world with Wikipedia, the world with Wikipedia will have a higher GDP, I believe.
Maybe, but I don't know if that would capture everything. I think it's possible. I expect that to probably be the case, but I'm not sure if that actually captures what we mean by the value of Wikipedia. I mean, yeah, I'm not saying I have like a strong model here, but clearly something's wrong about the way we measure.
I think this points out like what we care about for our models. So if we have good data and good information on the internet, that's like we're at the point where we can like train AGI or like train something very smart. And even if it's not directly captured by something like economic value for humans, is valuable to train our models.
Potentially.
And the other distinction you made is being like private progress, stuff that are happening in products, or stuff that are like just cool demos on the internet, like DALL-E. I talked to my Uber driver about DALL-E to like point at something like where humans could be automated. I tried to like talk to my designer friends, like, oh, have you seen this? Like you can just like type a few words and now you can get a good design. And they have no idea, right? So there's like people on the street, then there's like people in tech, and then there's the people working on the model. So let's say OpenAI employees who know stuff we don't know about. And possibly we could get, like they could know that we're like close to a fast takeoff, and we have no idea because we don't have access to their GPT-4 models. So yeah, those posts were like 2020, 2021. Those were like answers to AGI Cotra's report. But now in 2022, we had another debate between Paul Christiano and Eliezer Yudkowsky, as you might be aware of. The first post was by Eliezer Yudkowsky called, I think the first post was Die with Dignity. This was like a troll post in April, but I'm not sure if it counts to the debate.
Arguably, things started with the Miri dialogues, which were like
Right.
a series of like long transcribed discussions between Eliezer and various other people. Then there was the Dying with Dignity post, which I would actually like to talk about maybe briefly, because I think I have a very different take than most people do on that post. And then after that, we had like the AGI Ruin post by Eliezer, where he kind of like listed a bunch of reasons why you think we're fucked. And then Paul made a very, very thoughtful response where he kind of like goes through and says like why he thinks Eliezer is wrong about these kind of things. And these are like all these schemes, I feel like a kind of tie together. I feel like Dying Dignity is kind of parallel, but I think there's a thread between like the dialogues to the AGI Ruin to Paul's response, which is like kind of where we are now. Nate Suarez has started to also add his voice in, but yeah, that's kind of where we are right now.
So which one would you want to go first? So we could just like summarize the discussion for the long like debate between. I
think that may be physically impossible.
Right. Is this too long? So maybe okay. So
I think
maybe your take on the like Die with Dignity. You said you had some.
Yeah, I could talk about the
this.
Die with Dignity part, but let's focus first on the arguments or the dialogues and the AGI Ruin, and then I'm going to talk about Die with Dignity because I have a few things to say about that. So something very interesting, I think, was going on. So in the dialogues between Eliezer and Paul, so there's these huge, long discussions between Eliezer and like various other people, among other Paul, like it's like Paul and Rohan Shah, Richard No, some people from OpenPhil and such. And one thing that I noticed reading the dialogue, I read the whole thing. It's like 60,000 words or something, but I read all of it, and I found myself having an interesting reoccurring response, is that everything that people who are not Eliezer say seems to be more reasonable, but for some reason I think Eliezer's right. And this was a bit of a dissonance inside of my head while reading the whole thing. I was like, I'm on Eliezer's side, but I really can't explain why, because it seems all the other people are being way more reasonable than him. I think I've mostly resolved this confusion since then. So I think the apotheosis, like if you, dear listener, read any parts of this, I would recommend you read the AGI Ruin post followed by Paul's response to it, because the AGI Ruin post was objectively quite bad. I think Eliezer literally says that in the post, like this is a bad post, and I think Paul's response is very good. I think he makes a very, very good response to it. Also, Evan Hubinger has a very good comment responding to the AGI Ruin post, which is also very, very good. And really they make just a much better case than Eliezer about like how he's like way too pessimistic. He's dismissing all these other things. He's way too overconfident in his views of like how progress is made in these fields or such. And ultimately, I think, for example, Paul's post is just a much better post than Eliezer's on like every objective measure.
I think you could even like just read Paul's post.
I would read both. And so that whole build up was building up to a but. And here comes the but. But Eliezer is a very interesting writer. I've always found reading Eliezer to be very pleasant. Some people like him, some people dislike him, whatever, right? But like something about Eliezer's writing has always been very appealing to me. It's been very easy. It doesn't cost me energy to read Eliezer stuff mostly, except the psychic damage from reading his fan fictions. But I think one of the keys to understanding why I like Eliezer stuff, and some people, others dislike it, is that he has a certain way of writing, which is often more almost like metaphorical or like more like fables almost. Like he often talks in dialogues. He often tries to write things in like non-technical stuff. While, for example, Paul is much better at like saying very concrete. Well, depending on concrete, but very technical things, like trying to make predictions, trying to ground things in betting. Like it's one of the most frustrating parts of the whole dialogue is when Paul just tries to get Eliezer to bet on literally anything. It was like, Eliezer, pick anything you want. I will make a prediction on it and we can just take. And he just resists it and resists it. And like, oh, for God's sake, Eliezer, just what the hell are you doing, man? So like that's where I think like really like most people turned against Eliezer on that. Paul was having a silver platter. Like, look, Eliezer, anything you want, just bet on it, and I'll bet on it as well. And it was just, I think they eventually found like one tiny thing to bet on, but it was a real painful process. And like, yeah, that didn't make Eliezer look good. Here's Mr. Bayes himself, who was always, oh, we should always make bets, and here he is not making any bets. And I can tell that's like, I think a very fair criticism of Eliezer that he didn't do that he should have made bets.
I think they both like didn't find anything concrete to bet on.
Yes.
So it's very easy to say like, okay, yeah, Connor, give me a bet and then I'll make a prediction.
Yes. And like the truth is that is very hard to do. So like I didn't update as negatively as other people did. Like I was like, this is actually a very hard thing to do. This is hard to find bets like this, but also I see in this sense, Paul was being more, traditionally rationally virtuous in a sense. But so here's my hot take. And I don't know if Eliezer agrees with this or not. Eliezer, if by some chance you ever are listeners who disagree with me, I'm sorry. But my interpretation of what was actually, I think a lot of people were missing what was actually happening in these dialogues, or like why Eliezer was saying the things he was doing. Again, this is just my interpretation. I could be completely wrong here. But I think what was happening is that Paul and Eliezer were actually having two completely separate conversations in parallel. And a lot of people point to this out. It seems like they're just talking past each other. And I think the reason this happened is because they had two different goals. I think what Paul was trying to do was trying to talk like a scientist, like to have a scientific disagreement, to try to find cruxes and whatever. I think Eliezer had a different goal. I think what he was trying to do is to convey an anti-meme. So an anti-meme is an idea that by its very nature resists being known. It's something that if I tell it to you, you will like forget it, or you will want to forget it, or like it will not properly integrate into your world model, and you'll get like a garbled version of this. Anti-memes are completely real. There's nothing supernatural about it. Like most anti-memes are just things that are boring. So things that are extraordinarily boring are anti-memes because they just, by their nature of what they are, resist you remembering them. And there's also a lot of anti-memes in like various kinds of like sociological and psychological literature. So a lot of like psychology literature, especially like early psychology literature, which is often very wrong, to be clear. Like psychoanalysis is like just wrong about almost everything. But the writing style, the kind of thing these people I think are trying to do is they have some insight, which is an anti-meme. And if you just tell someone an anti-meme, it'll just bounce off them. That's the nature of an anti-meme. So to convey an anti-meme to people, you have to be very circumspect, often through fables, through stories, through vibes. like this is a common thing, how like, moral intuitions are often anti-memes. Things about, various human nature, or like truths about yourself. Like what, psychologists don't tell you, oh, you're fucked up, bro, do this. Like that doesn't work, because it's an anti-meme for long. Like people have, protection, they have ego. There's like, you have all these mechanisms that will resist you learning certain things. Like humans are very good at resisting learning things that make themselves look bad. So things that hurt your own ego are generally anti-memes. So I think a lot of what Eliezer does, and a lot of his value as a thinker, is that he is able, through however the hell his brain works, to notice and comprehend a lot of anti-memes that are very hard for other people to understand. I don't think Eliezer is the greatest mathematician, or the greatest scientist, or the greatest whatever. And I think you would agree with that he's not the greatest mathematician or anything like that. I think his value is in that, for whatever reason, the way his brain works is decorrelated in certain ways from how most people's brains work. And it allows him to pick up certain anti-memes, which are valuable. And I think a lot of his frustration throughout the years, which he expresses very strongly in a lot of his writing, is because he's been trying to explain anti-memes to people, and it's really fucking hard. Like if you read the sequences, there's a lot of, obvious, like, okay, here's how this thing works. Here's how this thing works. But so much of it is like almost more like religious text. Not in that it's like worshipful, but in that it's metaphorical. It's not supposed to be taken literal. You're supposed to hear a story and an update on the vibe. You're supposed to generalize from this scenario to other scenarios to like learn anti-memes. And I think, like, for example, with the against biological anchors thing, what he was trying to do was to convey an anti-meme, not to convey a prediction. Paul thought he was trying to make, Eliezer is trying to weasel out of a prediction because he doesn't have one. Well, Eliezer is trying to say, I have a valuable anti-meme that people should understand, and I'm trying to communicate it to you, but I'm failing because it's hard to communicate. And I think this brings us to the Death with Dignity post. So the Death with Dignity post. So you might say, Connor, this sounds insane. What the fuck are you talking about? Anti-memes? That seems ridiculous. I can't think of a single example of an anti-meme. That's the point. But that aside, I have a perfect example. A real life, living anti-meme in full daylight for you to look at. And that anti-meme is the Death with Dignity post. The Death with Dignity post is, in my opinion, one of the most perfect examples of an anti-meme in broad daylight. So let's talk about the Death with Dignity post. The Death with Dignity post is a very controversial post written by Eliezer, where he kind of has his like doomer mentality of whatever. He's like, Mary is shifting away from saving the world to let's die with as much dignity as possible. This is obvious. I mean, people say this is a troll post. This is
That's posted on April 1st.
It was April 2nd, I think.
Might be like it did it on April 2nd.
Yeah, something like that. I don't know. It's like he was like, "Oh, this is April Fool's. Haha, this is just a joke." But no, really. So like, it was like a joke, but like, wasn't really a joke. So my interpretation is not a joke. It's an anti-meme. So a great way to convey anti-memes is through jokes. Comedy is one of the most effective ways to convey anti-memes, especially social anti-memes, like things outside of the Overton window. Like one of the classic anti-memes is things outside of the Overton window. Like humans will naturally resist not just like hearing and knowing things outside of the Overton window. It's a natural way to create anti-memes. And what is so fascinating to me about that post, like so when I first read the post, my reaction, I think, was quite different from many other people in the EA and rationalist world. My reaction was like, oh yeah, wasn't that always the plan? So I was just like, I mean, yeah, okay, yeah, of course. And I'll explain why I had this reaction.
Yeah, just maybe can you summarize like the main point of the post? I think it was something like
I'm gonna get to that. Because like I think so. The surface level is that he says, look, everything's so fucked. We can't save the world. We should just try to die with with as most dignity as possible, right? We should just like, and then he argues that like, instead of trying to focus on saving the world, we should focus on just like dying with more dignity or whatever, right? So that's the surface level aesthetic. That's the non-anti-meme. That's the packaging. The packaging is, okay, we should like, oh, we're so fucked. I'm so depressed, blah, blah, blah. That's the packaging. But that's not the anti-meme. The anti-meme is in a very, very hidden spot. The third paragraph. I'm joking, but I'm not. So why I love this post so much as an example of an anti-meme is that he literally spells out the anti-meme. Like literally word for word, spells out what the anti-meme is. And then the top rated comment completely misses it. It's actually amazing. So the anti-meme in the post is that what he says the surface aesthetic, the first like 2 paragraphs or something, are this like, oh, we're all fucked, let's all be depressed. And then like the 3rd or 4th paragraph or whatever, whatever the exact paragraph is, he explains what he actually means by this. And what he means by this is that he gives this example. There's a bunch of people in the rationalist movement and elsewhere who hear about the AI alignment problem. They hear like, oh, well, things are so dangerous and we're all going to die, blah, blah, blah. And then they're like, well, okay, we should blow up NVIDIA. That's like a reasonable thing to do, right?
Yeah.
And like, no, that is not a reasonable thing to do. You goddamn idiots. Holy shit. And the fascinating thing about this, so like I have heard people seriously making this, so like people are like, no one actually thinks this way. Oh, there are people that think this way. And I always have to tell them, so they're like, well, Connor, if you're so pessimistic, why aren't you blowing up TSMC? And I'm like, oh my God, how can I explain to these people why this is stupid? Like the fact that you came to the conclusion that this was ever a good idea already shows that there's something wrong with your thinking. So Eliezer diagnoses this thing the similar way to I do, is that utilitarianism and consequentialism is hard. Consequentialism is fundamentally hard. Consequentialism is the reasoning from consequences. Is that like whatever makes the best consequences, that's what you should do. This is fundamentally computationally hard. It's different from, for example, deontology. Deontology is just you have certain rules and you just follow those rules. It's kind of like the difference between P and NP in computational complexity theory. Evaluating your rules is always like a constant number of steps, right? You just kind of like look at the world. I have my like golden rule or whatever. I evaluate the rule and then I do that. Consequentialism is fundamentally like NP. It's much harder. I have to actually simulate all the outcomes of my possible actions and then pick the best ones. And this is arbitrarily hard. So if you are an ideal reasoner with infinite big brain energy, right? Then of course consequentialism is the correct way to reason. Of course it is. It's obvious. But here's the anti-meme. So what happens is a lot of people, so humans are by default deontologists. Like consequentialism is like kind of unnatural to humans. Most people are deontological. And some people, some usually smart people, usually like rationalist type people, hear about this great idea, utilitarianism, consequentialism. And they're like, wow, this is obviously better. So I'm going to be consequentialist now. And on paper, that sounds great. But you can't be a perfect consequentialist because it's too computationally hard. So you're always going to be an approximate consequentialist. And that's where everything breaks. So the diagnosis of why these people think blowing up TSMC is in any remotely way a good idea that would not make everything literally worse, which it would, to be very clear, is because they basically do like a one-step reasoning step. They'll be like, AGI bad? AGI need a GPU? Make GPU go away. Good. I did the consequentialism. And I'm like, if you're not capable of doing one more step of thinking of the second order consequences of how this would destroy all cooperation possibility, this would destroy all goodwill, this would get militaries involved, this would get governments making things secret, this would make everything so much worse. If you're not capable of doing this, maybe you shouldn't be a consequentialist. And that's the anti-meme. The anti-meme is that what he's trying to say is the deontological heuristic of try to do whatever maximizes dignity is much easier to compute. And his argument is, if you already failed this first test, this shittier rule will make you more rational, will get you better outputs than you trying to use your broken consequentialism. Don't be a consequentialist. Just take the heuristic, which is like right 90% of the time, because otherwise you're only going to be right like 50% of the time. So it's better for you to take the simpler heuristic of just taking this dying with dignity as a heuristic for generating your actions, and you're going to do better. And then we have the top post, the top comment in that post from my good friend AI Waifu. That's his name. Who I know quite well. He's a great guy. He's a very, very, very smart guy. I've known him for a while. And first, like, fuck that shit. Oh, I'm going to save the world. Oh, screw your shit. This is all terrible. And I'm like, oh my God, this is an anti-meme in action. He just, and I asked him afterwards, like, did you not read what the post said? He's like, oh no, I read the whole thing. And I'm like, oh my God, this is an anti-meme. Like, everyone just did not see 3/4 of the post. It was just deleted from their memory. It was just amazing. And I think this is a small look into what it is like to be Eliezer Yudkowsky. I think he has, not infinite, but he has like a handful of really, really useful anti-memes, which he's been trying to teach people for like 20 odd years. And some people pick up one of them or two of them. You know, some of them have now made it into the mainstream, like alignment being a problem. Like that's kind of like that anti-meme's getting out there. But he has failed to teach all of them, and he's now kind of, I think, given up and just like screwed.
Even if you get like all the anti-memes and you understand the post, I guess like you can still be AI waifu and like not want to do like low risk actions down like following like some deontological rules. You might just like want to take high risk and put like all your energy into like saving the world.
Yes, and the whole point of the post is that if you do that and you also fail the test of thinking blowing up TSMC is a good idea, you're not smart enough to do this. Don't do it. If you're smart enough to have you figured out that this is not a good idea, okay, maybe. But most people, or at least many people, are not smart enough to be consequentialists. So if you actually want to save the world, if you want to win, if you don't want to just look good or feel good about yourself, if you actually want to win, maybe just think about dying with dignity instead. Because that will, even though you in your mind don't model your goal as winning the world, the heuristic, the actions generated by the heuristic will reliably be better at actually saving the world. There's another interpretation of this, which I think might be better, where you can model people like AI Waifu, modeling timelines where we don't win with literally zero value. That there is zero value whatsoever in timelines where we don't win. And Eliezer, or people like me, saying, actually, we should value them in proportion to how close to winning we got. Because that is a more healthy, like it's reward shaping. It's like, we should give ourselves partial reward for getting partially the way. He says that in the post about like, we should give ourselves dignity points in proportion to how close we get. And this is, in my opinion, a much psychologically healthier way to actually deal with the problem. So this is how I reason about the problem. I expect to die. I expect this not to work out. But hell, I'm going to give it a good shot, and I'm going to have a great time along the way. I'm going to spend time with great people. I'm going to spend time with my friends. We're going to work on some really great problems, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But hell yeah, we're going to die with some dignity. We're going to go down swinging. And I think that's a much psychologically healthier way to think of this. I have seen so many young people come into this field with this like, I'm an anime protagonist, I'm going to save the world, and they burn themselves out in 3 months, do a shit ton of DMT, and disappear. It's like, it's not if you give yourself literally zero credit, the whole path. Yes, if you were a perfect consequentialist reasoner, if you're a perfect AGI that can think completely rationally about its goal, and there are some people that are like this. There are some people that are actually that rational. I can think of 2.5 people that are like this, maybe. And they can think like this, maybe. Even then, I'm not sure. But for normal humans, this is not a productive long-term way to think about things. If you have to sprint for 2 months to get some shit done, okay. But if you have to do 5 years of soul-crushingly hard mathematical research, which may or may not work, and you have like little support from the outside world, you're outside the Overton window or stuff, this is not a sustainable way, a psychologically sustainable way for you to live your life.
Yeah, I guess there's like, let's say AI waifu case where you just like try to speedrun AI alignment and you're like very optimistic. Then let's say that's a Paul Cruciano view where you're like maybe more optimistic than Eliezer and you like play for the long run. And I guess like in the vibe of Eliezer Yudkowsky's post, he's really, really pessimistic. Like basically like 99% or one like probability of one of dying. And then like you just like win dignity points. And for most people, it's also like something bad because like it's kind of a doomer vibe.
Oh yeah, don't get me wrong. I think Eliezer made a mistake in how he phrased this. Like he has many anti-memes. He's not the best at conveying them. I think Scott Alexander might be the best person at conveying anti-memes. But Eliezer's not actually the best person at conveying anti-memes. I don't think he did a good job. I think he could have written a much better post.
It's not a critique of Eliezer, because I agree that the anti-memes were great, and like he conveys a bunch of information with his posts. It's mostly about like what's the best way to work on AI alignment? Is it to like just assume you're going to die with some high probability, or like be optimistic? Or do you want to reason in the world where you're still alive in 10 or 20 years? Or do you want to just like assume you're just going to earn dignity points? And I think for some people, maybe like for you, it's better to just like win dignity points. For some other people, it's better to just like imagine themselves like having kids and surviving.
Yeah, but the problem is you're now conditioning on false statements. You're breaking your own epistemology, and that might work if you're working in fucking sales or whatever. But if you have to solve an actually hard problem in the actual real world, in actual physics, for real, an actual problem that's actually hard, you can't afford to throw your epistemics out the door because you feel bad. And if people do this, they come up with shit like, let's blow up TSMC. Because they throw their epistemics out the window and like, this feels like something. Something must be done, and this is something, so therefore it must be done. And the same thing happens is like, you can condition on many of things. And there are many things you can condition on. But if you condition, for example, like one of the things you just mentioned is like, okay, how about we just play for the timelines where we win, right? The human brain can't reason about quantum timelines. And by doing that, you're predictably shooting yourself in the foot. You don't actually have a probability estimate of what will happen in the future. Of course you don't.
What do you mean by quantum timelines?
Like, I mean like, timelines, right? Like possible timelines. Like I say quantum doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be quantum timelines. It's like possible timelines, right? Like from here on, there's like possible timelines that could, some of them go well, some of them don't, right? And now you might say, okay, let's only reason about the ones where we win.
Mostly like for an EA, if you want to like think about your impact, if you think you have only 2 or 3 years, or 5 years, let's say, before AGI, and you condition of like short timelines, and you say like, oh, this is looking pretty bad. I should probably like bomb Taiwan. This is like you're going to do like bad actions. So instead, you might just like want a condition of like 10 or 20 years. So then you can like change your career and like have an impact in the future.
Sure, you can do that. Obviously, if that is your response that you should bomb Taiwan, then obviously don't. And if that is your only option, fine. But obviously the superior option would be condition on timelines without going crazy, without, galaxy braining yourself into doing stupid shit. And I think Eliezer argues that a simple way to do this is just try to condition on the dignity prior. Just try it. Just give it a shot and see how it works for you. Because there's actually a lot of, it's actually a very natural human prior to think about dignity. Like if you read the concept of dignity has a very, very long history in human, literature and psychology and culture. Ancient cultures have talked about dignity extensively. Like that was for a very long time of human history, that was one of the main topics that you would talk about. And so it's actually a very natural thing for humans to think about. But somehow rationalists have galaxy brained themselves outside of all of this. And you're correct. Maybe for some people, maybe for most people, the stress is just too much. And you should just hope for the better, go find a farm, find a wife, have a good life. And if you do that, I wish you all the best. Seriously, I do. I really do wish people the most. I always tell my friends, get married, have kids. If that's what makes you happy, do it. But also, don't delude yourself. Don't or at least don't get in the way. If you say you can't work on the problem, okay, but at least also don't become Jan LeCun and then try to get in the way of the solutions.
Yeah, I think there's some meme in entrepreneurship of believe it, fake it until you make it, or something, where entrepreneurs try to delude themselves that they're CEOs, and then until they actually having a company.
Yeah, I think there is something to be said about this stuff. This is what I think rationalists would call dark arts. And my recommendation on what you should read there is Nate Suarez's blogs, Mining Away to the Heavens, and his posts on detaching the grimometer and several other posts like that, where he talks a lot about how to approach these things with dark arts without going completely insane. Hopefully, I find this post he's written very, very helpful personally, because there are ways you can reason, you can not get super depressed about things, while also not galaxy braining yourself into blowing up Taiwan.
Gotcha. I will read those. I think on EleutherAI, so the Discord server you co-created, we have maybe two camps: the more alignment side, or maybe more Doomer, more Eliezer side, and maybe some people more building large language models that are less concerned maybe about alignment. And so one of the things you did was create this server and bootstrap a little bit the server at the beginning, maybe like now is a smaller part of your time. And it has been slightly controversial in the larger community if the impact of EleutherAI as a whole has been good, because you could summarize it, but like essentially it's open sourced the pile, so a data set to train GPT-3 like models like GPT Neo X and GPT-J. And you also like open source GPT-J, not really EleutherAI. I think it was mostly like Ben Wang and Aaron Komatsuki.
Yeah, who were members of EleutherAI, but it was mostly those two. It was mostly Ben, but yeah.
So yeah, I guess like because this podcast will be watched by people from the AI alignment community and like EA community, do you want to maybe like address the concerns people have mentioned over the years about EleutherAI?
Yeah, I would really love to. So one thing I would like to say, like very up the head, like obviously I don't know. Like, did I do the right thing? Did everything go exactly as planned? Of course not. Like, are there things I would do differently? Of course. Like it would be surprising if that was not the case. But overall, I think, there's like a few things. There's a lot of details and nuances, I think, about EleutherAI that kind of get garbled in most tellings of the story. So yeah, I think there are completely fair arguments to be made that, maybe EleutherAI was a bad idea, maybe you shouldn't have done that, et cetera, et cetera. I think there are also good arguments why it was a good idea or why it did work out. I obviously think it was a good idea, and it was net positive. But there are reasonable people who disagree with me here, and I can understand us disagreeing on this. So like, if you disagree with me on this, I don't think you're insane. I think that's like, I think you're wrong, but I don't think you're insane. And to explain a little bit about why I think this. So we have to think back to like a pretty different time when EleutherAI was first created. Like this was back in like 2020. And, the alignment community hadn't really updated yet on scaling and on...
Basically, you kind of created the anti-meme of scaling with EleutherAI.
There was a bit of an anti-meming going on there, and also some normal meming. But yeah, in a sense, So I talked about this a bit earlier already, like how I had these like really strong updates. Like so EleutherAI first started just like, me and some friends dicking around, right? Which I think is a perfectly healthy and harmless thing to have happen. Some hackers dicking around in a Discord server, having some fun programming some stuff, I think is a good and healthy thing that, is good. But, we didn't expect to get anywhere. Like, we were like making like little toy models and we were just like having fun. It was the pandemic. We were bored to tears. It was good for all our mental health, right? One misconception that often comes up with EleutherAI is that we were not always alignment concerned, that like someone convinced us or like somehow we were like, someone proselytized to us or like changed our mind or something. This is completely false. This is documentarily wrong in the sense that I replicated GPT-2 a year prior to EleutherAI and wrote rather cringy but interesting blog posts where I explained my exact reasoning about why I did this, why I think this is good. I linked to like lots of less wrong posts and like lots of things why I think this is important for alignment or whatever. And also I changed my mind. It was actually Buck Schlagaris, who's CTO of Redwood now, who changed my mind about releasing it back in the day. And I wrote a long post being like, okay, yep, I was a fucking idiot. This was a bad thing and I'm sorry about that. But I think there's nuance to why I decided not to release GPT-2 that then did not apply, at least not in the same capacity to what we're doing in Eleuther. I'm going to get to that in a second. So basically, from day one, we always took alignment seriously, at least I did. So I always was alignment in mind. And my reasoning was that when GPT-3 came out, I was already primed by GPT-2 and such. And it's like, I looked at this and I was like, holy shit, like, we have to pivot. Like alignment needs to work on this. Like this is the thing. Like this is the thing we need to work on. And now everyone talks about large language models, and like everyone talks about scaling. It's like all over the alignment forum and stuff. But back then it was like me and Gwern, like no one else really in the alignment sphere outside of like OpenAI was like taking scaling and these kind of stuff very seriously.
Well, I guess there was this post about are we in AI overhang? I think it came out in 2020 where people like realized that you could just like scale GPT-3 and make even bigger models, and like it got like a bunch of upvotes. I think it was curated.
There were some. So like Gwern deserves a lot of the credit for like really spreading the scaling meme in the alignment community. So I think probably Gwern deserves definitely Gwern deserves more credit than like EleutherAI, for example, does in spreading this meme in the alignment community. So thank you for your services. Also, please start working on alignment, Gwern, I beg you, instead of whatever anime shit you're doing. But
please, Eliezer, stop writing glowfig as well.
Yeah. So for me, from the very beginning, I saw, wow, these models are important. We have to understand these things. We have to understand their scaling properties. These emerging capabilities are important. Interpretability is incredibly important. And I basically saw an arbitrage opportunity. So the way these models work is you have a training phase, which is very expensive and very like engineering tricky, like very tricky. But then once you've done that, you using the model for like fine tuning or generation or doing interpretability is much simpler in comparison and costs much, much less money. So I basically saw an arbitrage opportunity, is that there were a ton of people who I think should be doing research on these models, but clearly did not have the engineering and funding to build these models themselves. So I had a bunch of nerds who wanted to do this for fun anyways. And we had access to some hardware from various sources. So maybe if we just did this, one-time investment, we could have like this leverage of like many groups using our models and our work to do research. And also in the process, we would gain something very valuable, which is tacit experience with working with these kinds of models, which I think to this day, a flaw or like a big mistake that a lot of people in the rationalist and alignment community, not everyone, but like quite a number of people do, is undervaluing practical experience, hands-on actually touching a thing. Like there's an illustrious scientific history of the method of just staring at an object very hard, and that I think is sometimes unfairly maligned. They're like, well, I remember having this conversation with some people in the alignment sphere. Is like, oh well, why did you build the models? Just use GPT-2. That's like fine. But I'm like, well, okay, what if I want to study the bigger properties? They'll probably exist in the smaller models too or something. And I'm like, no, I just want to, and they'll be like, well, name 3 experiments you're going to do with this exact model. And I'm like, I could come up with 3, sure, but that's kind of missing the point. The point is like, we should just really stare at these things really fucking hard. And turns out, yeah, my experience, that was a really good idea. Most of my knowledge, like my competitive advantage that I have in other people is gained from that period of just actually building the things, actually staring at them really hard, and not just like, knowing about the OpenAI API existing and reading the papers. There's a lot of knowledge you can get from reading a handbook, but actually running the machine will teach you a lot of things.
Yeah, so I agree that like to understand the models and how to align them, how to steer them correctly, you might want to like implement them yourself or like replicate the soda. And I think that's like one of the main arguments in the prosaic alignment research literature, like, oh yeah, please build the stuff and then you can like interpret it and like align it. However, some people working at Anthropics might say that you can still like reproduce the soda and do like private research, not like open source the models, and then do like maybe like public alignment research. And what EleutherAI did was like everything was open source and everything was like things people could like use to train their models. So it kind of accelerated AI timelines for everyone.
Yes, I think that's completely false, but I'll explain why. I think there's a very toxic meme that exists in the alignment world right now. I agree that in the ideal case, the correct case is for large, well-funded groups to do AGI research internally and never fucking tell a soul about it. I think that is the correct way to do it. I think what Anthropic, for example, is doing is good. And even though I disagree with many of their things, and I have some problems with OpenAI, fundamentally, a lot of what they're currently doing is good. I think their alignment research is problematic for several reasons, but the idea of like, some people are like, oh, OpenAI not publishing GPT-3. I'm like, I wish they didn't even publish the paper, dude. Like, I wish they didn't even publish the goddamn paper. So one of my important parts of my threat model is that I think 99% of the damage from GPT-3 was done the moment the paper was published. As they say about the nuclear bomb, the only secret that it was possible. And I think there's a bit of naivety that sometimes goes into these arguments where people are like, well, without, EleutherAI accelerated things, they drew attention to the meme. And I think there's a lot of hindsight bias there in that people don't realize how everyone knew about this except the alignment community. Like, everyone at OpenAI, everyone in Google Brain, DeepMind, like people knew about this, like, and they figured it out fucking fast. Like they're like, well, EleutherAI accelerated release of open source models. And I'm like, that's just look at what happened. Bloom just got released the other day, which was big science's, big model. Meta released their OPT, 175 billion model a few months ago and stuff. Like, this was always going to happen. There was never a question of there's no counterfactual world in which EleutherAI didn't exist where OPT didn't get released. Like that's like not a counterfactual that makes sense. But even more so, there's a lot of contingent factors about like how things were done. There's one thing I do regret about EleutherAI, and I think in retrospect was a mistake, and that mistake was releasing the pile. So this was actually a surprise to me. So when we created the pile, I expected, who's going to care about this, right? Like maybe a few academics will use this to save them some time when they're doing some experiments or when they're like there's reasons to want to release the data set to understand like what the things actually learn. Why is memorization stuff? There's like lots of reasons to release the data set. And so I don't know if I regret it, but if I regret one thing, or if one thing did increase capabilities, it was releasing the pile, not GPT Neo X or like GPT-J. I don't think those really mattered because none of those were ever state of the art, right? EleutherAI made very clear from day one is that we would never release something that is state of the art or beyond the state of the art. We were like very clear about this. If we ever stumbled upon something that was beyond anything anyone else had, we would not release it. So we were always, and part of my threat model is that I expect all the danger basically to happen from the cutting edge. So if a 200 billion model exists and someone has a 20 billion model, I don't think the existence of the 20 billion model significantly changes the speed of the frontier. Right. I think there's arguments against that, but yeah.
I agree that, most people at Google Brain or DeepMind started scaling after the GPT paper. They didn't wait for GPT demos in July. No, they were scaling stuff before. So I agree with this. And so you have a server with thousands of kids or maybe researchers looking at scaling memes. So maybe they get a little bit more into scaling.
Oh yeah. I think
a little bit more. So just memes.
I think there's absolutely a world in which EleutherAI is net negative. I do not want to deny that.
Sorry, I guess the end of my sentence is that they also look a little bit more into alignment. And if they never heard of alignment before, and they heard about scaling because their coworkers talk about scaling models, then they get maybe 5% more into alignment.
Yep.
So I think that's an argument for why it's positive.
Yeah. So one of the things that EleutherAI did, and this was very much intentional, is that it created a space that is open to the wider ML community and their norms. It is respectful of AI researchers and their norms. And also we have street cred in the sense that we are ML researchers and we're not just some dude talking about logical induction or whatever. But still has a very strong alignment meme. Is that alignment is high status. It is a respectful thing to talk about. It is a thing to take serious. It is not some weird thing some people in Berkeley think about. It is a serious topic of serious intrigue. And for what it's worth, of the 5 core people at EleutherAI that changed their job as a direct consequence of EleutherAI, 4 went into alignment.
And I think most people I talked to were into ML, people at Google Brain or OpenAI. They all know about EleutherAI, even people in the AI art community. They know about EleutherAI because you did art. But most people don't know about Eliezer Yudkowsky. They have problems pronouncing his name, and I kind of get what they mean.
Yes.
So I think you kind of made possible this kind of Chad alignment researcher.
Yes.
Before that, they were oh, this is a crackpot in the internet talking about it. And now it's more into the mainstream. You kind of talk to the engineer, to the hackers. So that was pretty good.
And that was very much intentional in the sense that for me, it was always clear that alignment is Chad. It's obviously this is the coolest problem in the world to work on. Alignment is the coolest problem. And it suffered a lot and still suffers a lot, I think, from an image problem in that, a lot of people, there's just a lot of cultural disconnect between the ML world and the alignment world for various historical reasons. And EleutherAI had this cool, which I very much enjoyed, this like overlap where like we're legit. Like people in the ML community really respect EleutherAI. You know, they look at EleutherAI like, oh yeah, these guys are legit. This is real street cred. And then they also say, well, these guys take alignment really seriously. Well, maybe we should take it seriously too, or at least think about it, right? I'm not saying, was it a resounding success? Did it do everything I wanted? No, I mean, it could always been better. But I like to believe that there was a positive memetic contagion that happened there. As I say, like, you know, a lot of people that I know that were in ML started taking alignment really seriously. Like, I know several professors at several universities that were like, got into EleutherAI through the scaling memes, and then were convinced that like this alignment thing seems kind of important potentially. And then, you know, it's like, I don't know, you can always argue maybe they would have came to that conclusion without EleutherAI or whatever, but I think there's a lot of positive there. So my completely biased assumptions, I mean, obviously I'm biased here. Like I try to be objective, but like, you know, these are my friends, right? So of course it's going to be biased. You're not trying to like ignore that. But my view is that I think EleutherAI was a good thing. It allowed, I think, a lot of positive memes about alignment to spread. Like a different, like EleutherAI is not really EA culture. It's like, it has a lot of like DNA of like EA and rationalism, a lot of rationalism DNA, but it's its own thing, right? And it's like a mutant offspring between like, you know, the ML world and like the rationalism world that bridges the gap quite nicely. I think this is a nice culture, a nice like set of memes to exist in the world. I think this is a positive thing that these memes exist. I think other people might say, no, these are bad memes and these shouldn't be spread. And I can't objectively like argue that one way or another. But I think there's an argument to be made that a lot of good things came of it. And, you know, it led me to where I am today. So
I guess there's like other like ideas that were spread from it. It's just one is open sourcing is good. Like open sourcing models is good. Like, oh, GPT-3 was not published. Oh, let's do it instead of them.
Which is not our official position, to be clear. That was never our official position. It is what people thought our official position was. Our official position, which you can read in our blog, which has always been there, is that not everything should be released. And in fact, we at EleutherAI discovered at least 2 capabilities advancements ahead of anyone else in the world, and we successfully kept them secret because we were like, oh shit. So the one is the chain of thought prompting idea, which we then did later publish. I believe I showed Eliezer the pre-draft, so he may be able to confirm that I'm not bullshitting you on this. I think it was Eliezer I showed that to. And so in that regard, I fully understand why people think this, because that's the default open source thing. And there's several other open source groups now that have kind of like split off of Eleuther, or they're like, you know, distant cousins of Eleuther that do think this way. I strongly disagree with them, and I think that is not a good idea. It was always contingent. EleutherAI's policy was always, we think this specific thing should be open. Not all things should be open, but this specific thing that we're thinking about right now, that we're talking about right now, this specific thing, we think should be open for this reason. But there are other things which we may or may not encounter, which shouldn't be open. We made very clear if we ever had a quadrillion parameter model for some reason, we would not release it.
Just to push back a little, the models that you open source were so GPT-J and GPT-Neo-X that were like so smaller than GPT-3, but still like close to Soda. So you said something about state of the art, but I believe GPT-J in terms of open source was Soda on coding. At least like when people release Codex, I think GPT-J had maybe 5 to 7% on some benchmark, whereas like GPT-3 had like 0%. So it was like GPT-J is like cited in the Codex paper as like state of the art in coding. Because the pilot has like some GitHub code, I think. Yeah,
that might be possible. I don't exactly remember the exact benchmarks there, but like we did experiment a lot of this stuff. It wasn't at the state of like GPT-3. GPT-3 was still better at most of these things. I think GPT-J may have performed slightly better on some benchmarks or something, but like these benchmarks. So like when I say Soda, I don't mean open source Soda. I mean private Soda. And there was a ton of, you know, stuff that was like way ahead of it. I do agree. Like, again, I want to be very clear here. It may have been a mistake to release GPT-J. That may have been a mistake. I don't think it is one for various contingent reasons, but I'm not like ideologically committed to the idea that this was definitely the right thing to do. I think given the evidence that I've seen, for example, GPT-J being used in some of my favorite interpretability papers, such as the editing and eliciting knowledge paper from David Bauer's lab, which is an excellent paper, and you really should read, which uses GPT-J, and several other groups, such as Redwood, using GPT-Neo models in their research and such. I think that there is a lot of reasons why this was helpful for some people. This was good. Also, the tacit knowledge that we gained has been very instrumental for setting up Conjecture and what I do now. So I think there are reasons why it was good, but I could be wrong about this. Again, if people disagree with me about that, I think I disagree, but I think that is not insane.
Got it. But yeah, let's move on from this. So do you want to still talk about the future of EleutherAI, or would you prefer to like talk about Conjecture?
Yeah, so the future of EleutherAI it's kind of in a, it's different now, right? You know, a lot of people, all the regional people have moved on from EleutherAI. Some people got jobs. Some people are working on different projects now. It's still a pretty active community. You know, it's still a great place to like, you know, read up on current literature or like have some cool discussions about alignment. It's like, it's probably my favorite place to like just have live chat discussions about alignment. It's like, you're very, very technical. If you want to like really talk about real technical alignment, it's one of the best places you can go. We have a bunch of cool regulars that like jump in and out of various conversations there. So it's really still a nice place. I like hanging out a lot. It's very intelligent, lots of good stuff. There's some interesting projects there, but it's much slower than it used to be. There's not as much frenetic energy at the moment. We're welcome it. If anyone wants to come in and start bringing back some frenetic energy, we're very welcome for that. We have way more resources nowadays than we did back in the day. It's ironic that we have a lot of resources, but less energy because, you know, people are older, people have jobs now. You know, things are a bit different now. But it's like we have like a lot of compute that we're like happy to share with like alignment researchers or people working interpretability projects or stuff like that. Like if you're working on an interpretability project or an alignment project and you're bottlenecked because you can't, you know, get the compute to train a large model or something, literally hit me up anytime and like we'll figure something out. Like we have access to like quite a lot of compute that we are happy to work with. And, you know, will we continue to build larger models and release them? I don't know, maybe. Like we have the resources now to do it. I'm not sure if anyone, we probably, I don't know, we might not. If someone feels like it, you know, if someone puts in the energy, because it still is a lot of damn work to retrain those things. It's just like a lot of babysitting and a lot of annoying stuff. So I think it's possible we might do that. Again, of course, not pushing the state of the art, since now at least 2 GPT-3 size model exist. Maybe we'll add a third. No promises there whatsoever. But EleutherAI is still a nice place.
Is there like any alignment work going on or research? Like people, I know at some point people were trying to speed up alignment research there.
So yeah, that was a project led by Janice as part of the AI safety camp, which released a data set including like all alignment work ever done and stuff like that. So there's like a few projects like that. That project's wrapped up now. There's a few interpretability projects that I think Stella has been working on. I used to be involved in alignment research there, but that has now moved to Conjecture. And yeah, maybe this is a great segue to talking about what I'm currently doing,
right,
which is Conjecture. So Conjecture grew a lot out of some of the bottlenecks I found while working in EleutherAI. So EleutherAI, you know, is great. You know, I love the people there and such, but, and, you know, we had a lot of, you know, great people and such, but if you want to get something done, it was like herding cats. But imagine the cats also have crippling ADHD and are the smartest people you've ever met. So like it was, especially if anything boring needed to get done, right? If you need to like, you know, fix some bugs or scrape some data or whatever, just like, it would just like very often just not get done. Because, you know, it was all volunteer based, right? You wanted to do fun things. It's your free time, right? You know, people don't want to do boring shit. You know, during the pandemic, it was a bit different because, you know, people literally didn't have anything better to do. But, you know, now you have like a social life again, you have a job, and then you don't want to come home and spend, you know, 2 hours debugging some goddamn race condition or whatever, right? So like, it was hard. I ran into bottlenecks when working with EleutherAI. So one of the hopes I had when I like, you know, started EleutherAI, I was like, wow, this is gonna be like this great research org, and we're gonna like do all this research and stuff. And I was like, oh, you have to actually pay people to do things sometimes. So this led to Conjecture. So Conjecture is our AI alignment startup that I founded together with Sid Black and Gabriela Four. 2 people who I've met through EleutherAI. Sid is one of the co-founders. Gabriel is someone who I met through EleutherAI. And we started this company to tackle the alignment problem head on, and to you know, get over some of the bottlenecks that I found in EleutherAI by, for example, paying people to actually do things, which is a great way to motivate them.
And if I recall, you met both Gabriel and Sid back in 2020.
Yes, that's correct.
And like, when did the idea of like creating a company together came around?
So finally, Gabriel suggested we should do a company like 2 weeks after I met him or something, which is very funny. Gabriel's a great guy, and he's like the one thing about Gabriel is whenever he predicts something and I predict the opposite, he's always right. So he predicted we would do a company, and I was like, no, that's ridiculous. What? I couldn't do that. And he was like, oh, okay, we'll see. And then, well, here we are. So the idea was first floated like very early in EleutherAI, but I like put that completely on ice. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to, just focus on open source and such. So it became really concrete around like late 2021, like September, October 2021, I think, when Nat Friedman, who was the CEO of GitHub at the time, kind of approached us at EleutherAI and say, hey, I love what you guys are doing. It's super awesome. Can I help you with anything? You want to like meet up sometime? And so to his credit, he donated a bunch of money to help EleutherAI keep going. So man of his word. And he happened to be in Germany at the time, which where I was as well. And he's like, hey, do you want to like meet up for coffee? And then, so we met up, really got along. And he's like, hey, ever thought of like doing a company or something? I was like, I have been thinking about that. And he's like, hey, yeah, why don't you just come by the Bay sometime? I was like, talk and such. And I'm like, so I was thinking like, oh, cool, I can go to the Bay and I can like, so this is at the time, so kind of like it was a confluence of factors, right? It was like, excuse to go to the Bay, to talk to like, both Nat and his friends, but also talk like OpenPhil and like potential EA funders and stuff like that. And also, I was getting like on EleutherAI, I was hitting those bottlenecks I was talking about, where I was like trying to do research at EleutherAI, but it just wasn't working.
And you also had a job at Aleph Alpha.
I also had a job at Aleph Alpha at the time where I was also trying to do research, and I did some research at Aleph Alpha, but I found it also to be bottlenecked by various factors. Because I wasn't really in control. I didn't have access to any amount of resources I might have wanted and such. So there's like a few bottlenecks there that just like were hampering how much progress I could make on the kind of research I want to do. Also, like the Aleph Alpha wasn't super aligned on the kind of research I wanted to do. They were like open to my ideas and the kind of stuff I wanted to do, but they weren't 100% on board with like what we wanted to do. And I wish them all the best, but we had I just didn't think this was the best place for me at that point.
And so you went into the Bay and you met Nat's friends.
Yeah, I met Nat and friends. And so what happened is basically, so I was like, young, bright-eyed EA, and I was like, okay, great. I'm going to make an AI company. I have like all these people from EleutherAI who are just like super, super great. Like, arguably some of the like only people in the world outside of big tech companies who've built and trained large models. Like Sid is an absolute wizard. He is like single-handedly responsible for like most of GPT-Neo X and also probably most of Neo, like truly just incredible stuff. And they are like several other just like really, really great EleutherAI people on board with this idea who were like wanting to do something like this. So I was like, oh, well, yeah, I'll go to OpenPhil. Like everyone keeps saying there's so much money in EA and like, no, there's nothing they can fund. So like, surely they will fund me. Well, so OpenPhil, had some understandable concerns. They were like, well, we don't really know you that well. You're asking for a lot of money. Your research seems a little weird. The whole EleutherAI Copenhagen interpretation, blah, blah, blah. Like, you did some things in the past, which we kind of disapprove of, which, it's fair. You can, I understand. So they were like a bit hesitant. But then I went to the VCs and they're like, yeah, you're cool. Here's a ton of money. Do whatever you want. I mean, not literally, but like, kind of like that. They were like, yeah, you're awesome. Like, you'll do some cool shit. So like, let's do this. Let's try some cool shit.
But I guess the difference between VCs and open philanthropy is that open philanthropy is like trying to have a positive impact, whereas VCs maybe think about profit a bit more, and they see like the potential of like a company with like a bunch of bright people that come from EleutherAI.
Yeah.
And you as a CEO and the co-founders. So I think there's like a different ways of looking at the problem.
Yeah. As I said, I fully understand the open philanthropy view here. Like, I'm not like saying like, oh, they're so insane. No, like this is like a very reasonable thing. I may have not funded myself in this situation. I think I would have actually, because I'm more risk tolerant. But like as institutions are, you have to be conservative, right? Like, your reputation's at stake and such. So like you have to be way more conservative. VCs can afford to like have things blow up. But for example, for OpenPhil, they're very concerned about their reputation. So like it's really important that they don't, invest in something that blows up, that like looks real bad. So like I fully understand.
And would you want to maybe mention the different investors, VCs, or amount of funding, or is it just something private that you might not prefer to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I've said it in the past. It's like, yeah, so it's like Nat Friedman, his friends, Daniel Gross, Patrick and John Collison were like the main investors. We also got some smaller amounts of money from like various other sources. It's like Arthur Brightman, Andrew Karpathy, Sam Bankman-Fried, all put in like various amounts as well. Yeah, so Sam came in really late because FTX fund, Future Fund didn't exist when we were raising the first. And at the very end, like the Future Fund came around like, oh, can we like leave a little bit open in case Sam wants in? And then Sam wanted in. So he invested like a small amount towards the end as well.
Always a good strategy to just like leave a window open for Sam Bankman-Fried.
Yeah, we left like a little bit open, and then yeah, he was very kind of him to decide to invest a little bit as well towards the end. But yeah, the most of the money is from VCs at the moment.
And yeah, what about the first employees? I know you came public. Well, you announced the investing in April 2022, something like that. Did you already have employees there? Or
yeah. So Conjecture kind of came together in early March. It's like, we wrapped up all the funding and stuff in like January, February was kind of like a run up time and quit my job and stuff like that. And then March was kind of like when everyone the first people started to like get together. It was still a complete mess. We were like just like a bunch of weirdos hanging out in a WeWork or, back and forth in different countries. Like some people were in that country, some people in that country. It was a complete mess. And ultimately, and then, so in April, we kind of like first publicly announced ourselves. So at that time we were like 8 or 9 people already, I think. So we had like this like founding team that we kind of like pulled together from EleutherAI. And yeah, so then we announced ourselves in April. So we were already around like a month at that point. And yeah.
So you said that you wanted to make a company because, Nat talked to you and Gabriel talked to you 2 years before. Was there like a particular reason, something you want to create with the company, like some philosophical, point of view, or like something you think you had that other didn't?
Yeah. So Conjecture differs from many other orgs in the field by like various axes. So like one of the things is that we take short timelines very seriously. Is that there's a lot of people here and there that like definitely entertain the possibility of short timelines or like think it's like serious or something, but it's like no real org that is fully committed to 5-year timelines and like acts accordingly. And we are an org that takes this completely seriously. Even if we just have 30% on it happening, that is like enough, in our opinion, to be completely action relevant. Just because there is a lot of things you need to do, if this is true, compared to like 15 years timelines, that no one is doing, that seems like it's worth trying. So we have very short timelines. We think alignment is very hard. So the thing where we disagree for like a lot of other orgs is we expect alignment to be hard, the kind of problem that just doesn't get solved by default. That doesn't mean it's not solvable. So like where I disagree with Eliezer is that like I do think it is solvable. Well, he also thinks it's solvable. He just doesn't think it's solvable in time, which I do mostly agree on. So I think like if we had 100 years time, we would totally solve this. Like this is a problem that can be solved. But doing it in 5 years with almost no one working on it, and also we can't do any tests with it because if we did a test out and it rolls up, that's already too late, etc., etc. There's a lot of things that make the problem hard. So yeah, there's all of that. We're also very pessimistic about slowing down AGI. So like I think coordination between like orgs is actually definitely something we're trying and like not impossible. Like getting like, OpenAI and DeepMind and Anthropic all in a room together to talk, I think is like a very feasible thing. One of the positive things that I found is just like, no matter where I go, the people working in the AGI space specifically are overwhelmingly very reasonable people. I may disagree with them. I think they might be really wrong about various things, but they're not like insane evil people, right? They're just like, they have different models of how reality works from me. And they're like, Sam Altman replies to my DMs on Twitter, right?
Weird flex, but okay.
I mean, it's like, but what I'm saying is like, he's not that unreasonable, right? Like I very strongly disagree with many of his opinions, but the fact that I can talk to him is like not something we should have taken for a given. This is not the case in many other industries. And there's many scenarios where this could go away. And we don't have this thing that like everyone in the space knows each other and can like call each other. Like, even so I may not be able to convince Sam of my point of view, the fact I can talk to him at all is a really positive sign, and a sign that I would not have predicted 2 years ago. Like I thought, oh, this guy would never talk to any of us or whatever. But like, I don't know, we might disagree, but it's like the guy I could talk to.
Is it because you're in the same, tech space?
Yeah, it's just like this AGI space of like, OpenAI, DeepMind, Anthropic, Redwood, etc. Like it's all a space like even if people disagree with each other or think the other people are really wrong or something, it's like every person I've met in this field is like pretty okay. Like I haven't met really anyone where I'm like, oh shit, this guy's like actually evil. And those people do exist, to be clear. And if the field continues to grow, those people will move into the field, and then we're really fucked. And this is, for example, why I'm pessimistic about government coordination. So I think, for example, getting the USA and China to coordinate to slow down GPU deployment is hilariously impossible. Like, I think that is like absolutely ludicrously impossible because these kinds of actually evil people do exist in government. Not all of them, of course not. But like, government selects for these kinds of people. And with these people, you can't just do shit like this. So like, I think it would be possible for Demis and Sam to sit down, have a dinner, and like agree on something. I do not think that is possible between the USA and China. So that's why I'm like pretty pessimistic about a lot of government stuff. Not all government stuff. I think some stuff might be helpful, but I'm like very skeptical. But yeah, so I'm just saying this because I think coordination, communication within the community is like very valuable and something that we can conjecture think is important and like worth doing. So ultimately, where all this philosophy leads us is we think we are screwed by default. Things look pretty bad. We don't have much time. The problem is very hard. And we don't think that any current approach is like obviously going to scale and work. It's possible. If I'm wrong about one thing, this is like one of the things I might be wrong about. But I don't expect any of the current methods to work. I have various reasons to believe this. So what this means is that for a timeline to go well, we have to go through at least one crazy new breakthrough. There has to be some miracle. There has to be some new insight. And importantly, miracles can and do happen. Like things, before Newton discovered calculus and his laws of motions or something, what were the odds that both, the motions of the stars and the motion on Earth are like both the same thing and also like human interpretable in the first place? Like it could have been that this is just some impossibly complicated thing that cannot be understood by humans. But then you see calculus and the laws of motion, it's like, okay, I guess that's it. Okay. And like in retrospect, like super obvious. Like I think it's really hard for modern people to put themselves into an epistemic state of just how it was to be a pre-scientific person, right? And just like how confusing the world actually looked. And now like even things that we think are pretty simple, how confusing they are before you actually see the solution. So I think it is possible, not guaranteed or even likely, but it's possible that such discoveries could not be far down the tech tree. And that if we just come at things from the right direction, we try really hard, we try many things, that we would just stumble upon something where we're just like, oh, this is okay, this works. This is a frame that makes sense. This deconfuses the problem. We're not so horribly confused about everything all the time. So to do that, well, if you need to roll high, roll many dice. Conjecture, the ultimate goal is to make a lot of alignment research happen, to scale alignment research, to scale horizontally, to tile research teams efficiently, to take in capital and convert that into efficient teams with, good engineers, good ops support, access to compute, et cetera, trying different things from different directions, more decorrelated bets. One of the problems I have with the current alignment community is that a lot of it is very correlated. So like, Anthropic, OpenFill, Redwood, Paul, all are doing very similar things. And don't get me wrong, those are good things. They should be tried. There's a lot of, good ideas there that should be tried. But I think we should try more things. I think we should try many things. I don't expect most of them to work. I think we should try more things. So, of course, we're not there yet. We've existed for like 4 or 5 months now. So things are moving super fast at Conjecture. Like, holy shit, I like whiplash from how fast things are moving here. It feels like I've lived like a whole lifetime in the last like 3 months.
That's like generally what people say about being a CEO is that the time is like much more intense.
Yeah, it's wild. It's wild how fast things are moving.
So yeah, about the thing where you try to like find some breakthrough, theoretical breakthrough that like similar to what Newton has found when thinking about physics and the motion of the moon and stars. I think that's similar to what Yudkowsky says about sigmoid and ReLU, where we might like be missing the ReLU of alignment.
I think that's completely possible. I'm not saying I know what the ReLU is or even where it will come from. What I'm saying is we should try lots of different things because we don't know where it will come from, we should try many things. Like as I said earlier, there should be more people working on this problem. Like that's my radical, crazy belief. More people should be trying things, and we should try more different things. That's my radical hypothesis of conjecture: is we should try more different things. So at the moment, we are, still not too large, and we're like 15 people now, and we are trying certain bets, which is mostly colored from the previous ideas from EleutherAI and such. So we have like certain biases in what we're trying. But what I would want long term is an organization that can efficiently scale and grow the number of researchers, the number of projects, and the number of different directions, and hopefully decorrelate. They're not all working on just one singular idea or in one singular paradigm, but are trying many different things and coming things in different directions. We're already doing like just like a lot of like quite different things. Like sometimes people are like, what is the one thing conjecture is doing? And I'm like, there's like 5 that have nothing to do with each other, and we've only existed for 4 months. Like we're a for-profit company technically that has an epistemologist on staff. Like,
what's the goal of the epistemologist?
That's a great question. So recently I was talking to someone, and they asked a very good question. This is a very good question. And they asked, how do you know whether you're making progress or not? I think that's an excellent question. And it's usually a really hard question to answer. Like, this is a hard question to answer. But we have an epistemologist on staff whose whole job is just to understand the epistemology of alignment and to make sure that we stay on track and are trying to actually solve the real problem and understand why it's hard. I'm like, that's a pretty good answer. So our epistemologist, Adam Sheemy, who's great, his goal is to understand why is alignment hard? How can we know we're making progress on it? How can we avoid being distracted? How have other problems of this kind been solved in the past? Like how did other scientific revolutions happen? Actually studying the history of science and the philosophy of science and epistemology, understanding how things work. And am I 100% sure this will lead to something? No, but sure we tried. Why don't more organizations have an epistemologist? It sure seems like something worth trying. And so far, I've been super happy with the really insightful stuff Adam has been, pulling up about how progress actually happens, how other great breakthroughs actually happen. Because there's so much mythologization of science that just really hides how the actual process works in the real world. That's quite difficult to disentangle. So a lot of people, their models of how science happens or has happened in the past is often very wrong. And if you follow these cartoonified versions of science, you'll often get very confused and not actually get problems solved. So I'm super happy actually to have, someone on that that's his full-time job is to do the meta question. How do we do science? Are we doing science well? Are we confused? And, it's also very helpful. I can just if there is a book I need reading, but I don't have the time, I'll point it and be like, Adam, can you read that book and summarize it for me? And I'll be like, yeah, great.
You have a alignment theory assistant that can do all the reading for you. And
in a way, yeah, it's great. He reads so much. It's actually insane. I don't know how he reads that many books. It's actually wild. It's his desk. Every time I come into the office, I swear there's just 3 new books on his desk, and thick books too, big books. It's actually wild. But yeah,
he's also in charge of the incubator for alignment that you're doing.
That is correct. So I could talk a little bit about one of my current views of what I think a solution to alignment works like. So this is something I've been thinking quite a lot about recently. It's how would I know I solved alignment? Or how do I expect the shape of a solution to be? And I don't have a good answer to this, but I have a pretty bad answer. I have a mediocre answer to this question. And so my mediocre answer to this question is something along these lines. So Gabe has a really fun hot take about economics. So his fun hot take is that economics is not a science. It's a technology and it's engineering. And he says that economists themselves are confused about what economics is. So the argument goes the following. A lot of people criticize economists because they make wrong assumptions. They say like, oh, markets are efficient, but markets are never really efficient, or like very rarely really efficient. Or they make assumptions about like, revealed preferences or irrational agents or whatever. And they're like, well, look, economics is stupid. But no, I think they got it the wrong way around. What economics is actually doing is they take this extremely high dimensional optimization problem, which is the real economy. Like the actual economy, to optimize the actual economy is just computationally impossible. You would have to simulate every single agent, every single thing, every interaction. It's just like impossible. So instead what they do is they identify a small number of constraints that if these are enforced, successfully shrink the dimension of optimization down to become feasible to optimize within. So when an economist or an economic theory says, assuming markets are efficient, then we can conclude X, Y, Z or something. What it's saying is, if you somehow enforce this property on reality, maybe by force, then you get the benefit that you can now reason about all these nice properties. Agriculture is similar. The correct way to maximize your yield of your field would be to simulate every single bug, every single molecule of nitrogen in the soil, every single plant, and then plan some kind of complicated fractal, of like weird plants interacting in like bizarre ways. But this is obviously computationally impossible. So if you want to reason about how much food will my field produce, monoculture is a really good constraint. By constraining it by force to only grow on, say, one plant, you simplify the optimization problem sufficiently that you can reason about it. I expect solutions to alignment to, or at least the first attempts we have at it, to look kind of similar like this. It will find some properties, they may be like myopia or something, that if enforced, if constrained, we will have proofs or reasons to believe that networks will, or neural networks will never do X, Y, and Z. So maybe we'll say like if networks are myopic and have this property and never see this in the training data, then because of all this reasoning, they will never be deceptive. Something like that. Like not literally that, but like something of that form. And so there is I think generalized alignment problem of like align an arbitrary system is definitely impossible, if only because of halting constraints. So like if ever aliens come down from space and hand us a USB drive with AGI.exe, do not run it. Burn immediately. Do not run it. There is, no matter how much you analyze the code, how many interpretabilities, do not run it. Burn it immediately. Do not run.
AGI_safe.exe.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, go right ahead. No. So basically, I think if you were given an arbitrarily, maliciously selected program, you're fucked. If it was selected by a sufficiently strong adversary, you're fucked. Like, just don't run it. But the reason I think alignment is feasible and can be done by actual humans in the real world is because we get to pick the agent, hopefully. And so I expect there will be constraints on the training. It would be like, okay, during training, we have to do X, Y, and Z, and W is never allowed to happen. And then if these conditions hold and, whatever, then we get this nice safety property, this property, or like we have a probabilistic proof that X will never occur with like this probability or whatever. And then this is not perfect, obviously. This is not a full solution, but this is what I expect like the first partial solutions to look like. And so this is why two of the main things that conjecture works on is interpretability work. The reason we work on interpretability, and we've just published our first technical post about interpretability, which is on how to defeat mind readers, just today.
Wow.
Yes. It's a taxonomy and like write-up of like all the ways we think neural networks could defeat interpretability tools. One thing in conjecture that we try to take very seriously is safety mindset. So I could talk about that as well, but like basically we really try to be paranoid. Like we don't want to make any assumptions that we don't have to make about these kinds of things. I could talk about that later. But yeah, we also have some other cool work on polysemanticity coming up about interpretability. So basically the reason we're interested in interpretability is because we think it will be necessary, not because it's a solution to alignment. I don't think that interpretability is a solution to alignment. I think it gives us the tools to implement solutions to alignment. If we don't know what's going on inside the network, we can't really do proofs or reason about the internal algorithms or like check for certain properties or something. So we need to have a really strong understanding of these internals in the network. Like there is this meme which is luckily not as popular as it used to be. But there used to be a very strong meme that like neural networks are these uninterpretable, like black boxes. There's
Right.
like that is just actually wrong. Like that is just legitimately completely wrong. And I know this for a fact. There is so much structure inside of neural networks. Sure, some of it is really complicated and like not obviously easy to understand for a human, but there is so much structure there. And there are so many things we can learn from actually really studying these internal parts. Again, staring at the object really hard actually works. So using these interpretability tools, we get quite far, but there is a big problem missing here. I think if we had perfect interpretability tools, whatever that means, that can, understand anything. We had like, an elk head, which is like, what the stuff that polygraphs down or something. That wouldn't be enough because we don't yet have a blueprint, a proposal for how we would then put together an actually aligned agent that's like actually embedded, that doesn't wire head, that doesn't, it actually does implement CEV or like whatever we wanted to do, right? So this is where the conceptual alignment research comes in, is that we think conceptual work is also extremely important. Is that even if we had all the right tools and all the compute and everything, we still wouldn't know how to build an AGI that is aligned. So therefore, it's really important that we also work on conceptual work. And that brings us to the incubator, which is one of our attempts to get new ideas in conceptual alignment research. So the incubator is called Refine. It's run by Adam Sheemy. And it is partially funded by LTFF, partially funded by us. And basically it brings together 5 promising young conceptual alignment researchers who have been selected for having unusual ideas, often selected to have the minimum exposure to the alignment community possible while still knowing about the problem. And they're going to start next month. So they're going to be in a very nice place in France for a while where they're all going to hang out.
In France?
In France, yes. So we rented them like a huge a vacation house for them to all just like chill there for like a month, and then they're going to come back to London to hang out with the rest of Conjecture. So where Adam's going to teach them a lot about the epistemology of alignment, some like the basics of like how to avoid obvious mistakes and problems that can happen, and the goal is for them to incubate new research directions. So we've really selected them for having weird new ideas that are different from other people in the community. And there is no obligation for them to work on like any conjecture stuff or stuff. We just want they'll just hang around the office. They'll try to figure out their own stuff. They'll get some mentorship from Adam, and we all we'll have fun having them around, of course, and talk about ideas and stuff. And the ultimate goal is just to get more ideas, incubate more ideas, see that some new ideas or research directions come out of that.
Is the basic idea to have the same thing as you mentioned for economics, where you have a simpler model and then you can reason about the thing and solve it more efficiently for alignment? So like those 5 guys might come up with a simpler model for alignment where we could have a easier solution?
Maybe. We have put no constraints on what they come up with. So like these guys have been selected, guys and girls who have been selected by just having interesting ideas. Will those ideas go anywhere? I don't know. Like every single of these people, like I cannot stress how excited I am for each of these people. Like I read the blogs of like some of these people, and they're just like completely insane in the best possible way. I'm like, holy shit, this is probably never going to work, but fuck yes. Like that's like just my every time I read these blogs, just like, this is completely insane. Fuck yeah. Like, oh, let's go. I want to see where this goes. I just want to see this person keep thinking and just see where things go. So I expect most of this to go absolutely nowhere and just get stuck or just like get confused or just drift off or whatever. But that's okay. It's okay. I think this is the only way where we might stumble on some new direction. We're like, hey, we haven't thought about AGI from this perspective. And from this perspective, you suddenly see all these new questions, all these new angles and stuff like that. So my hope is that, maybe out of that, 1 or 2 people develop a whole new research agenda that's like completely different from everyone else. And, maybe, we'll then hire them to work here or to stay working with us, or maybe they'll get funding from some other organization to continue the work, whatever. So our goal is to make more ideas possible and help people get into it. And also what we want to do is and we see this also as a test case for us to practice our long-term goals of getting good at scaling up alignment. How can we efficiently teach people? How can we get new people to do conceptual work? How can we industrialize the process? How can we industrialize alignment? How can we make things more efficient? How can we get more people working on it? New ideas. Not everyone doing the same thing. Not everyone following one direction. How can we, where do the bottlenecks? Where do things break?
Yeah, it's more like a process in a startup environment where you just like try to see how do you fund alignment research better in an uncorrelated way with like open field funding or LTFF funding, because we're both in the Bay and a bunch of people are coming here to learn about alignment and they learn from the same group, same people, read the same posts. So I think it's pretty good. It's a pretty good idea to have like uncorrelated bets.
Yeah, we just want to try different things. That's a reoccurring theme in Conjecture, that we think all the current things are great, and I'm like happy that they're being done, and more people working on the current thing is also good. Like, every person joining Paul working on its agenda, I think, is a good thing. But I think we can also do more. I think there is even more. It's also quite nice that so of the 5 people we selected, 0 are American. So we got 4 Europeans and 1 person from Southeast Asia. So we're getting like also a lot of people from just like different parts of the world.
And so you mentioned that they could be like offered a job at Conjecture. Do you also have like alignment research going on in Conjecture, or is it mostly in the incubator?
No, there's definitely alignment research happening in Conjecture. Yeah, absolutely. So we have several directions of both the interpretability work, and we also have some conceptual work, which I think we will also be publishing quite soon, which we dub with simulator theory, which is quite interesting, which is a new frame for thinking about GPT-type models, or generally self-supervised models, which it's almost a work of philosophy, but it's kind of like it's a different frame. It's a different scientific frame on how to think about these things, which we hopefully be talking about or hopefully publishing soon.
Right. Happy to read it on Less Wrong or Archive or whatever comes up. So one thing about publishing or releasing work is you post stuff on Less Wrong, and you also don't plan on releasing the models, or at least like not publish everything by default. And that's a policy close to MIRI, I believe.
Yeah. So we are non-disclosure by default, and we take info hazards and general like infosec and such very seriously. So the reasoning here is not that we won't ever publish anything. I expect that we will publish a lot of the work that we do, especially the interpretability work. I expect us to publish quite a lot of it, maybe most or even all of it. But the way we think about info hazards or general like security and this kind of stuff is that we think it's quite likely that there are relatively simple ideas out there that may come up during the doing of prosaic alignment research that can non-trivially increase capabilities. That we're messing around with a neural network to try to like make it more aligned or like to make it more interpretable or something, and suddenly it goes boom, and then suddenly it's 5 times more efficient or something. Like, I think things like this can and will happen. And for this reason, it's very important for us to I think of info hazard policy kind of like wearing a seatbelt. It's probably where we'll release most of our stuff. But once you release something into the wild, it's out there. So by default, before we know whether something is safe or not, it's better just to like keep your seatbelt on and just keep it internal. So that's kind of the thinking here. It's like a caution by default. I expect us to work on some stuff that probably shouldn't be published. Like, I think a lot of prosaic alignment work is necessarily capabilities enhancing. Making a model more aligned, a model that is better at doing what you want it to do almost always makes the model stronger.
Are you also planning to work on keeping up with state-of-the-art, scaling up models, and being an AGI company, whatever that is, like just like thinking about AGI in some sense?
So thinking about AGI in the broadest sense, well, we're trying to solve alignment. So of course we're thinking about AGI. Our goal is definitely not to like push the state of the art or to get anywhere near the limit in that regard, or race or anything like that. Also because we obviously can't, since a lot of that is computation bound, and we don't have exactly the kind of funding that groups like Anthropic or DeepMind or OpenAI have. But
do you plan on having this kind of compute soon, or
we don't? No. We will have a decent amount of compute because I think it's very important. Like, being able to run experiments on GPT-3 size model, I think is just important. That is important to do. And, I think there's many reasons why you might want to train GPT-3 size models. Like, for example, we have some really neat ideas about how to modify the transformer architecture to what we think become more interpretable, to like make our internal computations like more cleanly separated. And seems like that should be something worth trying, and it would be. And I think if that scales and that works, that might be a really promising thing to train large models on and to experiment with. But all this is very much instrumental. like we have no interest in building large models for large models' sake. That's just expensive. Like we have EleutherAI models and like the OPT models and now Bloom and stuff that we can work on. Will we train internal large models? Yeah, probably, because we have some various ideas of how to modify architectures and we want to do experiments on large models and stuff like this. But yeah, I don't expect us to catch up to, say, OpenAI. I mean, I think we can catch up to GPT-3, but God knows what GPT-4 is going to be like, and probably going to be a while until we could catch up to that. So it's super instrumental.
In terms of like sharing research or open source, will you maybe like open source alignment work and maybe not capabilities work? Is it?
Oh yeah, I mean, capabilities work. If we ever discover some crazy capabilities breakthrough, you will never hear about it. You will just never hear about it.
The question is more like, do you plan on open sourcing alignment tools or things like that?
Probably yes. It's all going to be on a case by case basis, and we're also going to take like external review on kind of stuff like this. So like we hope to have like a list of like trusted alignment researchers that whenever we're like, ooh, we're not sure about this, we like share with them, or we have a secret project. In a sense, my whole goal here is just like I want to have an organization where it costs you zero social capital to be concerned and keep something secret. So for example, with the chinchilla paper, from what I've heard is instead of DeepMind, there was quite a lot of pushback against keeping it secret. So apparently the safety teams want to not publish it. And they got a lot of pushback from the capabilities people because they wanted to publish it. And that's just a dynamic I don't want to exist at Conjecture. I want to be the case that if the safety researchers say, hey, this is kind of scary, maybe we shouldn't publish that is completely fine. They don't have to worry about their jobs. They still get promotions, and like it is normal and okay to be concerned about these things. That doesn't mean we don't publish things. If everyone's like, yep, this is good, this is a great alignment tool, we should share this with everybody, then we'll release. Yeah, of course. But I just want it to be, it seems like an obvious Pareto improvement for there even to be the option to keep things totally secret. And I think we should do that by default. And also siloed. So like different teams may work on different things and they don't know what each other work on. I think this is just a good default to have. But if we create a great suite of interpretability tools that we think are really helpful for alignment research, yeah, probably we'll release those.
Yeah, I think it's a good thing that you not have social consequences and think about like losing your job if you want to make stuff private. I think like Chinchilla was kind of scary as a safety researcher and maybe delayed by a year by those people. So I'm kind of happy that they did the job, but maybe it was too hard for them. So
yeah, it's like, it feels like we can do better.
We can do better. So let's go back. Let's focus now on this like idea of teams, how they interact with each other, and what's it like culture of like work. Like if you want to like do a shout out for like people to join your company, and I guess most of people around now in 2022 want to work remotely. You have some visiting office in Auckland, something in London. Like what's the like ratio of like remote in person? Like is there like a policy about it? Do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, sure, happy to talk about that. So we are based in London, and that is for various reasons. A lot of it is to decorrelate from the Bay. All alignment stuff is in the Bay.
They correlate all the time.
Yeah, I mean, we think there should be a place, for example, where European people can go. A lot of people can't get a US visa. A lot of people maybe don't want to move out of Europe. And so London is like a happy middle ground where like it's like there's like a pretty good visa process there. It's pretty easy to get technical workers into the UK, much easier than the US. It's much closer for many European people, like maybe people who don't want to move away from their family too far. So we think like there should be a EU place to do alignment, and that can be us. So I think there's a lot of nice things there. Also, by like London, I think it's a really great place to live. I don't like the Bay particularly. So for the remote policy, so generally we are an in-person company. So we think that in-person work is really, really valuable and like really increases productivity. And so far, everyone at the company agrees like, oh yeah, fuck it, I'm so glad to be back in an office after 2 years of not. But we, if you want to spend like a month or two abroad with your family or something, that's no problem. That's no problem at all. For more extensive remote on a case-by-case basis, I'm open to negotiating. So basically, if you're like, there are some people I have known who are like incredible super geniuses. They can, lay on some beach in Hawaii and still be the most productive person in the company. If you're one of those people, fine. Okay, you can do remote. But 99% of people that think they are that person are not that person. Managing things remote is a very non-trivial cost. And you'd have to be really good for it to be worth paying. But those people do exist. There are people that, and as I said, like, take a month off to like, visit your family or go on a hiking trip or something, yeah, no problem. That's super fine. We're also like super chill about like when you come into the office or like when you do your like generally also like, when I work from home like a few days a week, sure, like no worries. It's like as long as your work gets done, we don't really care when you do it or how you do it. Like, some people stay up till like 4 a.m. and they come in 4 p.m., leave 4 a.m., and it's like, fine. As long as their work gets done and they go to their meetings, which we have gracefully little of, every single person at Conjecture hates meetings. So we think, it's like we avoid them at all costs. But, sometimes you have to have them. Sometimes you have to sync up and talk to people and such.
Right.
But yeah, currently the culture in EleutherAI is, in Conjecture is really, really... It's really nice. I really like working in Conjecture. It's kind of like, it feels like an industrialized EleutherAI in many sense.
EleutherAI, but with more money.
Yeah, EleutherAI with more money and more like actually like, getting shit done and like actually working full time on things.
So essentially you're saying process-based management where if you get the shit done, you're good. And I would say Elon Musk remote policy where like if you're extremely good, then you can just like chill in that way. He gave this like memo at Tesla where like, oh, you should go back to the office except if you're like very good.
Yes. If you're sufficiently good, and these people do exist, I don't give a shit. Like, if you want to sit on the beach somewhere, and if you get like just more done than anyone else, and like, I don't give a shit. I'll pay you the full salary. Like, who cares? But like, these people are very rare. But if you are one of those people, do consider applying.
Right. I think another thing people might want to know is like how much compute they might have for their experiments. And so you mentioned a bit about the compute part, but I'm like curious on like because you didn't talk much about like the AI part. So like kind of the projects that are going on. Like if you're mostly like working on computer vision, RL, or mostly like language models. If people can like train models as big as they want, or are they bottlenecked with this? What would you say to those people?
So the way we're currently very biased towards large language models, this is just kind of a founder effect, just because like most of the research that we're currently doing kind of like inherits from stuff we were doing at EleutherAI and stuff. So we think there's a lot of reasons why language models are the best object or one of the best objects to study if you're interested in AGI. We think that language models have a lot of things in common with AGI that are really important. This doesn't mean we're like opposed to doing multimodal or all kind of stuff. We think RL is pretty scary for various reasons, and this is like something we're going to be publishing about. We like kind of think trying to develop alternatives to RL is like a pretty good way forward, actually. But that aside, like, for example, Sid, who is our CTO, he's the lead author of Magma, which was like a paper that like combined language models with like images, and it worked really, really well. So like we could imagine such work. No such work is currently happening that I'm aware of, but we're very practical, right? If there's an experiment, if there's a clear research direction where like we need to do some RL or we need to do images, we're totally open to that. Just most of our research currently doesn't require that.
Right. So now you're focusing mostly on large language models. I'm pretty curious about the products you plan on releasing or you've done work so far, because I think that's the first question people ask me when I say I'm going to do a podcast Conjecture is like, oh yeah, but how did they make money? Like they're a for-profit company.
Yeah. Happy to talk about that. So the choice to be for-profit is very much utilitarian. So it's actually quite funny that on FTX future funds like FAQ, they actually say they suggest to many nonprofits to actually try to be for-profits if they can, because it has a lot of good benefits, such as being better for hiring, creating positive feedback loops, and potentially making them much more long-term sustainable. So the main reason I'm interested is long-term sustainability and the positive feedback loops, and also the hiring's nice. So I think there's like a lot of positive things about for-profit companies. There's a lot of negative things, but like there's also a lot of positive things and a lot of negative things about nonprofits too that I think get sometimes swept under the rug in EA. Like in EA, it feels like the default is a nonprofit, and you have to like justify going outside of the Overton window. But I think there's a lot of reasons why for-profits have like a lot of nice properties. So like one thing to be clear about the for-profit nature, the founders, like me and the others, have full control of the company. The VCs do not have any control, shareholder or board or otherwise, and that will not change. Like the one thing we will not compromise on is control of the company. Like we're happy to have advisors, we're happy to like, compromise on like compensation or like whatever. But the one thing we will not compromise on is the control of the company. That's not up for debate.
Even if the company becomes public and there's like...
Well, it won't be public. There's no plans for that. I mean, and yeah, like I would never make it public if that meant giving up control of the company. So like, I don't know if that was possible to stay in control indefinitely of a public company. Probably not. So that's like just not really on the table. So one of the benefits of a for-profit company is that you can, make money. And, the EA sphere, has a lot of great funders who are, funding a lot of good work and such. But if you really want to scale alignment, talent and compute is really expensive. And, relying on the whims of billionaires is not a reliable long-term plan. I think it's great when SBF, spends a lot, invests a lot of money on Anthropic. I think it's fucking great. That's wonderful. And, I do hope that potentially, these kind of funders will also be interested in funding us and giving us amount of money. But I think there's a pretty clear way that if you want to have a long-term organization that really wants to scale, that wants to deploy, not just millions, but billions of dollars potentially over like several years, and you want to be, exist for years at a time, and not just rely on, what the crypto market's looking like at the time. Making products and making money and also raising VC is a very efficient way, or maybe the best way, to kind of have this kind of recurring stream.
And so how do you plan on making products and that might generate money in the future?
So the plan at the moment, this might change in the future. So like currently there is no product. There's no team working on product directly. But the plan is there will be a product team. This will be separate from the alignment team. Maybe people will move back and forth if they're interested. So like I've had people who like want to work on alignment, but they also really like working on product. And if you want to do that, I mean, that's a fine thing. Like sometimes the way I pitch it to EAs is working on the conjecture product team is like leveraged earning to give without the middleman. So instead of working from hedge fund and making a bunch of money, you can work for the product team because, there's a bunch of EAs that are, product managers or web developers or, whatever, right? Business developers and such, which is all fine skill sets. They're smart people and they want to help. So instead of working for, some FANG company and, donating your money to alignment research or something, instead you can work directly on a product. And then for every dollar of value you generate, we can, raise 10 to 100x VC on top of that. And then we have annual recurring revenue, which is the freest money you will ever get. And that's a really easy way to raise large amounts of money and to be, exist for a long time. So the way I would ideally want things to happen is to be like, there'd be a separate product team that, uses a lot of the same infrastructure that is we build anyways for the kind of alignment research that needs happening, to build various products on. And the way I think about products at the moment is I basically think that the current state of the art models have opened this exponentially large field of possible new products that has barely been tapped. GPT-3 opens so many potential useful products that just all will make profitable companies, and just someone has to pick them. And so I think without pushing the state of the art at all, we can already make a bunch of product that will be profitable. And most of them are probably going to be relatively boring, relatively boring SaaS products that are use
an API or
no, not an API. API is a bad product. APIs get always driven down to they get competed into the ground. No, you want SaaS products, something that helps you with some business task, something that helps you do it makes the process more efficient inside of a company or something like that. There's tons of these things which are just not super exciting, but they're useful.
Something closer to what adapt.ai tries to do?
Yeah, except not as insane and dangerous. But much simpler than that, something that can I don't want to give too many examples yet because we're currently pitching some stuff, but just useful tools, SaaS tools that can be used for various business processes. It's kind of you look at other companies that are using GPT-3 currently for their products, stuff like that. Not, things that are really useful, that really save companies money, that, make process, there's a whole huge class of tasks that were previously inaccessible to automation tools that now become accessible through GPT type models that open up all these really useful tools that can be used in just normal companies to make things more efficient, whatever, and make a profitable company out of it. And, have some millions of revenue and whatever, without having to do any crazy capabilities advancements, without having to push some kind of crazy new thing out there or anything like that. We don't have to have the biggest model. We don't have to have the craziest, new capabilities breakthrough for these things to work. We just need a good, useful tool. And I think there's a bunch of these, and I think we can get great talent from the EA world for building these kinds of things. And then by, investing, however much of our, of my time or investment or whatever into making these products, we will get, a much higher return. So it's a pretty utilitarian thing. It's I think that we can make a product, cost us, I don't know, $5 million to develop, and then we get like 5 million of revenue out of that, or 50 million of revenue out of that, or whatever. And that's like just like a very just like an obviously good thing to do. It's like, it's good to have contact with reality. It's good to make your own money, to also, like, for example, we're having a huge market downturn now. And man, I wish we had some recurring revenue right now. That would make me feel a lot safer that we don't, run into trouble. Because, the crypto market's super down now. So now all like the EA money is like much lower.
Right.
So like, if I had a reoccurring revenue right now of a few million a year, I would feel a lot better right now. I would feel like a lot less scared that, something might go down. So that's kind of the thinking there.
Right, but the thing you said about like being dependent on the funding of some rich billionaire, if you're a nonprofit, I think you kind of have the same and maybe worse with a for-profit, where you're like dependent on making revenue yourself or making profit for the investors. And I guess there's one point that could be made where for large models that you want to train, you might need billionaire money. Like maybe like impossible to like generate enough money to train GPT-4 by doing SaaS products.
OpenAI did it.
Well, wasn't them like funded by Sam Altman and Elon Musk at the beginning, and then now they're just like cooperating with?
Most of the money came from Microsoft, yes, which is for profit. So I think you could raise much more money in the capitalist world than you can in the EA. To be clear, if the EA world just wants to fund us at a large level for like a consistent period of time, absolutely fantastic. Great. Then maybe we don't even have to do a product. If Sam Bankman-Fried drops $1 billion on my lap, I'll be like, okay, screw product. We're doing research. But I just don't expect that to happen, which is understandable, right? So I think it will cost a very reasonable amount of effort. Like, I have people on my team who are just like, hey, I love doing product, and it costs me low energy. I'm like, okay, if you love doing product, you're good at it, it can generate us a lot of revenue, it doesn't distract the researchers, why not, right? I think this is a really positive feedback loop here. And I think there's a lot of also like psychological benefits actually to this kind of stuff. A lot of people just feel good about like making real things and putting them into the world and making money and stuff like that. I think that shouldn't be discounted, that there's like a lot of positive upsides to these kind of things. Don't get me wrong, there's also problems. There are incentives and there are things or whatever. And, you have to be very aware of those. And we are very, very aware of those and very wary of them. But, sometimes you have to just try things, right?
Yeah, there's a bunch of incentive in like doing stuff in the real world that make your beliefs pay rent, as Yudkowsky would say. I browsed your website and I wanted to get, a new job. I didn't find any podcaster job, so it's pretty sad. But also I didn't find any machine learning job. And I was wondering, like, did you like just pause the hiring for a moment because you had like too many people coming in, or are you planning to like scale the team to like double the size in a year? Like, what are the current plans for funding or growing the team in the future? Yeah,
I mean, basically exactly that, is that it was actually wild. So when we, our advertising, quote unquote, is just like, one less wrong post. They're like, oh, we're hiring, right? And we got like a ton of great applications. Like the signal to noise was actually wild. Like 1 in 3 applications were just really good, which like never happened. So like incredible. So we got to hire just like some really phenomenal people for like our first hiring round. And so at this point, we're already basically at a really enviable position. I mean, it's annoying, but it's a good problem to have, where we're basically already funding constrained. So we're at the point where I have people I want to hire, projects for them to do, and the management capacity to handle them, and I just don't have the funding at the moment to hire them. So like we have plenty of runway. We're like not going away or anything like that. But basically, I was like, ooh, how long will it take for me to find enough people to hire? And it's like just like they just ran through my door, and it was like, wow, these are excellent people to hire. So it's currently paused just because basically we are funding constrained.
So is the problem related to the economic crisis, and you mentioned the crypto market falling?
Yeah, so basically we were planning to raise more money, probably later this year. But because the market is crashing now, one of the reasons I'm in the Bay right now is I'm kind of looking to see if we can raise more money, hopefully from EA sources or potentially VCs, in order to, scale our organization even further, because the long-term goal is obviously to solve alignment, right? And talent and compute is expensive. You want to hire great researchers and you want to get engineers and you want to do great stuff. It's expensive. So we really think that there's a because we have short timelines, there's a premium on acting quickly, on like actually scaling quickly and actually building large teams quickly and such. So we would really like to scale further, and we really hope that, for example, we will get more funding from various EA sources. Maybe Sam Bankman-Fried can drop, I don't know, a quarter of an Anthropic on us or something.
Yeah, so if you were like to talk directly to Sam Bankman-Fried, I'm Sam Bankman-Fried right now in front of you. Why would I donate money to you invest money in you instead of Anthropics or let's say Redwood? Like, what's the difference between?
I don't think you should do it instead of these other orgs.
Why should I put Conjecture in my portfolio?
Conjecture is an organization that is directly tackling the alignment problem, and we're a decorrelated bet from the other ones. I'm super glad of Redwood and Anthropic are doing the thing they do, but they're kind of doing a very similar direction of alignment research. We're doing something very different, and we're doing it in a different location. We have access to a whole new talent pool of like European talent and talent that can come to the US. We get a lot of new people into the field. We have like also all the EleutherAI people coming in. We have a different research direction and decorrelated bets to get things in. And we can scale. We have a lot of operational capacity, a lot of experience, and also, entrepreneurial vigor, so to speak, to try to really build bigger things, to scale things up, to tackle more ambitious projects, and to get more things done. And so far, things have been growing incredibly well. We've already posted some of our early results, and we're going to post more soon. And we have an incredibly exciting team that can, has incredible good experience and like unique experience in many sense kind of skills to work on these kinds of problems. So if you want to diversify your portfolio of alignment bets, if you want to some more decorrelated bets, some more shots at the problem, I think we're a pretty obvious choice, pretty good choice.
I just want to end this because I think we kind of talked a lot about Conjecture with some of the questions that are a bit more non-serious and meme, just to conclude the whole thing from Twitter, which are the very important question of why is the law of excluded middle the best law? Asked by, I don't know, someone on Twitter.
Okay, this needs a bit of context. Excellent question. So the context of this is, the law of excluded middle is one of the axioms of classical logic, which basically says every statement in logic is either true or false. And this is one of my favorite topics to shitpost about on like EleutherAI off topic when I'm really late at night, because my galaxy brain schizo take is that like all of mathematics is basically wrong and is very confused and like defines truth wrong, and like all kinds of proofs are like wrong and invalid and like et cetera, like just like big brain stuff. And the reasoning for that, like we don't have time to get into all of the reasoning here. So I'm just going to throw out a bunch of super technical words and just like not explain them. Like if you're like a mathematician, you might understand these. And if you don't, then have fun Googling. Basically, the problem with the law of excluded middle is that it's an implicit halting oracle. So the classical equality of like the resolution of statements in classical logic is equivalent to executing programs. And the law of excluded middle assigned a truth value to every program. And I think that is a wrong value because there are actually 3 truth values: true, false, and uncomputable or unprovable. Right. And because you don't do this, because the law of excluded middle does not assign uncomputable to any statement, it always says true or false, you can now assign a true or basically a halting state to non-halting programs. So this is a halting oracle, and this breaks everything. So mathematicians that look at this are like, what's the problem? I love the law of excluded middle. It lets you prove all these great things. And I'm like, no, it's evil math. It's the bad math. It's cursed. I mean, obviously, I'm just, to be clear, none of this matters that much, but it also matters. Like, basically, there's this idea that truth is like a objective property that's like holds in all things. That's not true. That's not true. No, truth is a property that is dependent on your choice of logic. There is not one logic. There are actually many logics, and logics have assigned truth values to different truth values to different statements. So in the classical logic, you assign true or false or whatever to many statements that are assigned uncomputable in other logics. And I think this is bad because basically what the fuck does it mean that this non-halting program halts? Like, how this lets you prove like all kinds of crazy shit, like the Banach-Tarski paradox and stuff like this, which like intuitively don't make sense. I think the Banach-Tarski paradox is reliant on the law of excludability. That actually might be wrong. Please don't fact check me on that, mathematicians.
Maybe we could ask Adam Schmee, your epistemologist.
Yeah, but that's actually one of the things you're interested in. So the reason so here's the thing. It's not bad. People are just confused about it. If you want to create a logic that is halting complete, and you want to reason about a halting complete logic, okay, that's fine. You can do that if that's a thing you want to do. But you have to be very clear that this is not real. Halting oracles do not exist in reality. So any proof that has, for example, to do with physics that relies on law of excluded middle, I say is false. It is you made a mistake, because your assumption of the law of excluded middle does not hold in physics, because physics is computable and you don't have halting oracles in physics. So therefore, if you use any kind of mathematics in physics that is based on classical logic, you should be suspicious of it. This also has to do with like real numbers, for example, require real numbers, for example, have uncomputable numbers. So numbers that like are also like have this property of like not being computable. And then there are proofs that require real numbers to work. And I just say those are cursed. Those do not apply to reality. There is some fake other reality where hypercomputers exist. And if you want to reason about this fake other reality, okay, that's fine. You know, we can do that. But don't then apply the things you learn about this fake other reality to our reality. So there's other logics, such as intuitionistic logic, that doesn't have this problem. And intuitionistic logic is literally what like all of like programming is formalized in. So like, you know, like functional programming or like proof checkers are all formalized in intuitionistic logic. And that is fine. So if your proof works in a proof checker, that's okay. You know, if you can formalize it intuitionistic logic, that's okay. And that's, I think, the way we should be thinking about. I think there's a lot of here's the thing. It's like, Connor, none of this shit fucking matters. You goddamn nerd. No one gives a shit about your. I'm like, okay, you're correct, but so I think it's true that this almost never matters. It's like, almost nowhere will you actually find something where intuitionistic logic and classical logic disagree in the real world. But I think there are some edge cases where they do disagree, and that causes great confusion. One of these, which is relevant to EAs, is infinite ethics. So within infinite ethics, you get these really famously weird paradoxes where like, okay, well, there's infinitely different universes. Well, then obviously like manipulating other universes is like infinite value. So this universe actually has zero value. And like nothing I do here has any value whatsoever, like, you know, weird stuff like that. And this is like, especially if you accept hyper universes. So like if you think if you assign non-zero Bayesian evidence to, or like credence to the existence of universes with hypercomputers, those universes have infinitely more value than any number of non-hyper universes. So therefore, you must assign zero value to any of the universes that are not hyper universes, and like all these like weird things. And like this is like obviously just, and like I look, so the infinite ethics, I think philosophers, someone's like, wow, this is such a deep paradox. And I'm just like, it's just wrong. You made a mistake. This is a glitch. Your program crashed. Like the solution is assign zero value to hyper Turing universes. Zero, not 0.1, zero. And then you don't get this glitch. And this is what you would have, for example, intuitionistic logic, is that the intuitionistic logic would say any proofs that you do about hyper-Turing universes don't halt. So you can't reason about them. And then lots of these paradoxes just kind of disappear. There's also this one physicist whose name I forgot who argues how like a lot of the paradoxes like black holes and stuff actually go away if you formalize them in intuitionistic logic. I don't understand physics enough to comment on that, but I have an intuition that a lot of like weird edge cases around like infinities are because of law of excluded middle, and like because we formalize things because basically we're using the mathematics of a different universe. We're using mathematics of a halting oracle universe, but we don't live in a halting oracle universe, and we shouldn't use this math. We should use the math that is appropriate to our universe.
Right. So it's in some sense saying that we should only use the math where the halting oracle can compute their stuff.
Well, it doesn't exist. Like our universe doesn't have halting oracles.
Right.
So we should only use the math that doesn't allow halting oracles. And this breaks a bunch of nice proofs. So the mathematicians will then always like wail and cry like, what? Now we can't prove all our favorite statements. And I'm like, okay, sorry, your favorite statements are about universes that aren't ours. You can play with those if you want. That's okay. If you want to, formalize your like set theory or whatever and reason about like, crazy, hierarchies of infinities or whatever, be my guest. But don't get confused when you try to reason about reality. So like 2 places where this breaks is physics and decision theory. Is that I think if you formalize decision theory, for example, of an AGI with these like non-halting logics, you will get glitches. Basically, you will get weird, broken results and like demons optimization demons trying to manipulate the prior of the agent and stuff like that.
Is it something related to, let's say, Pascal mugging, where if you had like a very weird scenarios with like a different universes with like very high EV, they would stop on this problem? And
yes, this is related to that. So there are versions of Pascal's mugging that do not require this, that aren't fixed by this. There's some versions that there's a even stronger version of my take, which is the ultra finitist take, which is the absolute Chad gigabrain take.
Go for it.
Which is the take is like they're like large integers don't exist. Like they're just like, like you can only count this high, bro. Any other numbers, bullshit. Like that is the truly gigabrain take. and I don't know if I'm all the way at the ultra finitist view. So I'm currently what I call a finitist. I accept countable infinities, but not uncountable infinities. So the infinity of integers is okay, but the infinity of real numbers is not okay. Then the ultra finitists say no, there's finite integers, fuck you, which is the most gigabrain take. And the thing is, like, the ultra finitists are in a very important way obviously correct, in the sense that there obviously is a largest integer you can encode in physical universe. Like the universe, there's a speed of light, there's a limited amount of information, there's a limited amount of negentropy. There is a largest integer in physics. Not in mathematics. Now, in mathematics, there's obviously arbitrarily large integers. But in physics, there is actually a largest integer. And for example, I think there is a good argument to be made from the decision theory perspective of an embedded agent in physics that any proof or any like knowledge that requires steps that are larger than that integer should just not be considered in your hypothesis space, because you can never encounter them. There's never going to be a scenario that is dependent on a piece of information that is that long, because it doesn't fit into the universe. It just literally doesn't fit. So you will never encounter this, so you can assign 0 credence to it. Lol.
Just put like a low prior to like any number bigger than what is the biggest number again? Graham number? It's
one of the very large. It's not the biggest. I think the biggest one is Bigfoot, which is like the largest number you can express in like a Google of like first order logic symbols or something like that. I think it's like the largest one, or like one of the largest ones. It's like ridiculous.
Yeah, so this was pretty funny. I guess that's like another, let's say, fan service from Twitter. I might cut this. Don't worry. What is your favorite anime and who is your favorite waifu? I might cut this again.
Of course. So again, context for this one. It's quite legendary how much I hate anime. It's like I hate it so much. Like that's not even that I hate. I do hate it, but also like I don't know. So my favorite anime is One Punch Man, which is actually good. At least the first season. I didn't see the second one. And my waifu is Moomin Rider.
I think we actually talked about it last time. Sorry about this. And yeah, last one. How often do Connor Lee encounter a problem and just things like, maybe we should just like stack more layers, lol?
Often when people on Twitter say how deep learning can never do X. Not so often in my daily life.
Cool. I think that's it for the podcast. It was a pleasure to have you again. Hopefully it's not the last time. Maybe we could do one more before AGI.
Yeah, maybe if we're lucky.
Do you have any last word? I don't know.
It was a real pleasure. I guess I just want to stress how much I think alignment is a real problem and things aren't going well, but giving up hope is also not an option. It is a solvable problem. The real thing I want to say is it is a solvable technical problem. It's a thing that we humans can do. And I think there are paths forward that we can that can lead to solutions that are worth trying. We just have to try. And yeah, I'm hoping with Conjecture, hopefully also if we can raise some more funding soon, we will be able to walk down some of those paths. But I just really wish that more people would give it a try, see what they can do. It really is not just the most important, it's also the coolest problem. Like, it's such a cool problem. If you're a curious mind out there and you want a really good problem to work on, and at least satisfy your curiosity, have you something really interesting to working on. Working side by side by a lot of really interesting, fascinating people. It's not general, it's actually narrow in touch. I'm like, okay, fine, sure, but that's like really missing the point.